Move to the SOPs level. In the first course of this series, I'll be going over the basics of KineFX and Side Reading 18.5 and how it can be useful in many ways. To start, the way we import FBXs is now completely different. To start, we're just going to drop a geometry node, and then we'll hop right in that. And then the way we import FBXs now is through FBX, through KineFX. So there's FBX character import, FBX skin import, and FBX animation import. FBX character import kind of combines all of these. So really this is the one you'll be using most of the time. The others are just kind of there if you want to isolate stuff. So we'll import it, and from the get-go, there's nothing plugged into it, so we don't see anything. So I will go ahead and put in one of my, this is just the base model I downloaded from Mixamo. So I'll just open it up, and you'll see right away we are seeing the rest model, and we can see these bones inside of her. And one thing we'll also notice is that it came in at the right size, which is great because we have this little convert units button, which without it, it would import, I think she's about 200 meters high in this one. So that would happen to be a lot, and it would be annoying having to go real scale everything and bring everything down. So it's just a nice little thing that they have this automatic conversion of units. So she should be the right size. Okay, so let's break down what these three little outputs are. So the first one is your rest geometry. So this is just the mesh. And then the second one, we got the capture pose, which is essentially the skeleton at its rest position. And then the third input, we don't actually always need, but this is if there is an animation or anything on your FBX. And this is your animated pose. So this is basically your skeleton, but moving. Re-highlight this, and I bring in something that is animated. So this is her Roomba dancing. We'll see this this skeleton, and we'll see it move if we jump through the timeline. And we'll notice that nothing's really happening with the base mesh, and that's because each of these outputs don't really do anything to affect the model. So we actually need another node for that. We need a bone deform node. I'll drop that down. You'll notice it has 3 inputs, which are actually these exact 3 outputs. So it has basically the geometry you want to deform your model with all the painted weight attributes and everything, and then you have your rest points, which is the skeleton at rest, and then you have the deform points, which is your skeleton animated. So if I move and I plug all 3 of these in, you'll notice we have this little Roomba dance animation. Now I'll go ahead and I'll tie this to the timeline. So awesome. So we can import animations, and if we wanted to on the timing, so if we wanted to make this slower or make the animation faster, on the FBX character import node we have this timing tab, and we can do it by time or by frames. And let's say I wanted to make this twice as fast. I just input that too. Now she's going twice as fast. Let's just make this drastic so you can see. So that's 10 times as fast. I can make it like half speed. Now she's slow Roomba dancing. So yeah, so that's how you can kind of play around with stuff. You can change the animation start time. By default, it's linked to the first frame you have. So I have mine set to 1 right now. If I change it to 10, then the animation is going to start at 10. I actually think I might need to change this by time. Yeah, okay, so you can see now it starts at 10, 15, 20, all that stuff. So that's great. But now I'm going to go back to just the base mesh with no animation. And from here, I'm going to show you how we can control FBXs that have skeletons but no animation. Basically, most of KineFX revolves around one. I mean, I wouldn't say revolves around it because you don't really want to use this to animate. But for posing and for just right out of the box, the node rig pose is going to be one of your most used nodes in this scenario. And what we're going to do is we're going to be plugging this in from the animated pose into the deformed points. And you'll notice nothing's really on this node. We won't want to be controlling this node from the parameters. We want to control this node in the viewport. And essentially what it does is it allows you to rotate and transform the joints of your skeleton mesh so you can do things. So if I select this elbow joint and I start moving it, you'll see that all of a sudden we can deform our mesh by the skeleton without having to do any type of setups or anything. And this is essentially what's considered FK animation, which is where, according to the hierarchy, you'll see we have this new hierarchy view. If I was to move the right shoulder, then the right arm, the right forearm, and everything down this list would rotate along with it. You'll see if I rotate this, everything's moving downward, but if I say rotate the finger, it's only going to rotate what's down the hierarchy of this. And the hip is usually where you'll control any type of master movement. So you can see I can move her whole body here. If I want to move the leg up, this down. So this is a really quick way of just immediately getting poses out. And you'll notice as you move things in here, we'll get these added little parameters. So if I move the foot that I hadn't already moved, you'd see, well, okay, well, this is 7 now, so I've transformed 7 joints. And now if I click on another joint that I have not added yet, it's going to add another transformation. And the nice thing about this is you can go through these and you can either just clear the whole thing out. So if I hit the clear button, then we're back to no transformations. But let's say I wanted this to, see, I don't like these because these numbers are like incredibly small and they bother me. So I'm going to zero these out. And then I'm going to change the rotation to -45 because I only want it to be rotated 45 degrees. And so you can use this directly if you want to, but you do have to just kind of select, just kind of have to touch it, any of the joints to get them up on here. One thing that you want to note is that typically with rig pose, you don't want to be doing much transforms. So you want to, I mean, when I say transforms, I mean literally like the position. Rotations, awesome, work perfectly fine, but as soon as you start transforming things, there's no constraints on this rig pose. So you'll notice things kind of just start deforming and just not some great looks. If you accidentally touch some of the translates or anything, you can control middle mouse button click to zero them out. Same with the rotations or any of that stuff. So what can we do with this? Because like I said, animating on the rig pose is usually not what most people, I mean, you definitely can do it, and there's definitely been times I've done it. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying usually it's not the ideal way to go about animating these FBX characters. So one thing I like to do a lot is, so let's get a pose here. So I'm just gonna put our arms down, and let's say I wanted to have her look off to the right. One thing you'll notice about rig poses is that they're procedural, so they kind of stack on top of each other in local space. So this one, I can just rotate her neck, and on this one, I'm going to go call it rotation neck raw, and then on this one, I'm going to call it arms down. And you'll see that if I plug this one just directly into the base, her head is still going to be exactly the same. Everything we edited on this node is still going to be applied, but we can just take this off. So to maybe show you a better way of this, I'm gonna rotate the neck on the arms down rig pose. Oh, get this out of here. And then I'm going to add this on top, and you'll see that this rotation adds on to the other rotation. So we can keep rotating on this, and then this will still be applied after that one. So the nice thing about this is that we can use this to create some nice poses. And I'm going to just delete this neck transformation. So let's say I wanted to make her head go left and right, and I didn't want to, I essentially didn't want to animate using the rig pose and just have to do that, animate all three rotations every time I wanted to rotate her neck. So I'm going to go ahead and call this RL for rotate left. Then I'm just going to Alt drag to create another one, and then I'm going to go ahead and create this and drag her head that way. So I have a left and a right, and what I can do now is we have this other node which is called skeleton blend, and this is different than a blend shapes or a sequence blend or anything like that, because this KineFX in rig pose works in local space and as well as world space, but instead of blending directly between the two positions, it's going to kind of still maintain the hierarchy and the parenting values. So we can go ahead in here and we can plug these guys in. And then right now it's set to 1, which means that it's going to take the input from the B input, so the 1. And then 0 would be taking from this input. So we'll notice that, I call this, this is a terrible naming structure actually, rot, right. Change this to rot left so it's less confusing. And so we'll notice she's looking right because I have it coming into the 1. And now if I blend to 0, you can notice she'll be looking back and forth. And now the nice thing about this is we can use a lot of this. So I'm going to go call this look right, left, and then I'm just going to create another null, put these guys in here, and then have this as kind of its own little thing. So we got this guy in here now, and then if we wanted to, we could just copy and paste this whole setup, and we'll take this again, and I'm going to 0 these out for right now. And then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to create a rig pose that we can pose on. So I want one where her legs go up. And again, this is just for example. This is just trying to show you how you can use this. So I'm going to call this legs up. And on this one, I'm actually going to just delete one of these guys and replace this one. So we actually want the original coming in through the first pass, so we can essentially say don't do anything to the legs if we're at a value of 0, but if we're at a value of 1, we want the legs lifted. And this won't override anything back here. So we can use these to continuously adjust our model. We can animate these values, and they can look great. And as far as just the basics, I'm going to stop this video here, and in the next one, I'm going to go over some more. So thank you for watching. All right, picking up on what we learned in the first lesson, I'm going to show you a little bit kind of more practical way of using these rig poses, and something I like to do specifically. So what we want to do is we want to start creating, essentially what we want to do is I'm going to create hand controls for this, so I can easily curl the hand into a fist, or I can widen the hand, or I can basically like so I can just adjust each finger individually and control that with just sliders, and I can make it real nice and real easy. So what we want to do is It's going to require a few different rig poses, but this first one, I'm going to go rig pose curled fist. And all we got to do here is we just got to curl this into a fist. The best way about doing fingers with a rig pose and anything FK is you want to select all of these joints before you actually start really manipulating anything, because instead of going through one by one and say I wanted to curl it, I'd have to go here, I'd have to go down to the middle of the finger, then the end of the finger, and then I get my curl. So, but that's not what I want to do, because if you select all of them at once, all of your rotations are going to be applied to each individual. So you'll see by curling, with all of them selected, by just curling at the base, I can basically curl each joint, and since they are parented to each other, it's basically curling from this point curls, and then this joint curls, and so forth. So you get kind of a continuing curl effect. Okay, so we want to go ahead and select all the fingers, and I'm just going to stop the video while I select all the fingers. Alright, so I have all these fingers selected on the left hand, and I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to select. I like to just go back and hold shift and select the middle finger, just because I don't want to be curling around any of these orientations. And then I'll go ahead and I'll just curl to a point that looks decent. And then I'll usually go ahead and I'll make a few edits on top of all this. So I'll just kind of go around and pose how I want kind of a fist look to look like. And then little tip in the viewport, when you're rotating, I don't exactly know what the default is, so you can either rotate around in world space, where you'll notice the Y is up, and then I got all these values, and everything's kind of rotating around in world space. If I hit M, you'll see it changes the alignment, and I can keep changing it until it's aligned with object or component, and that way I can kind of you'll see this whole thing moves with the object. All right, and then so we got the fist curled, and then I'm just gonna lazy. I'm just gonna copy and paste it. You really can just drop down another one. I'm gonna call this rig pose splay, which is gonna be like, let me just scroll up here, clear this out, and we just kind of want to widen the hand. How it would, like, if you had to stretch your hand out. You don't gotta call it splay, but that's what I like to call it. So you can get real crazy with this too, if you want. Like, honestly, it's not bad to go way out here, because we're gonna be blending between these. So getting more extreme values actually isn't the worst thing ever, because you're gonna be kind of compiling these on top of each other. So you don't know, sometimes there might be a way you want to stretch something. But I'm also going to show you some cool things about skeleton blend here in a second. So just don't be afraid to go too extreme with some of these. These are just kind of supposed to be blend shapes. So we got display. And let's see, what else do we need? And then I like to do a rig pose flex. So on this one, we don't want to actually rotate these fingers. We want to rotate just these guys. And all I'm doing here is I'm just holding shift and selecting all of these. And I'll go back to the middle. And I'll do something like that. And this is supposed to be like if you're gripping something, like you're flexing your hand, or you're like, imagine you're holding onto a wire or something like that. All right, so and then we got our flex, our curled, and our splay. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna make a splay in also, because that might be nice to be able to reverse this kind of. Again, I'm going to go to extreme with this, just so we have these values that we can blend between. All right, we have our rig pose splay in, rig pose splay out, our curled fist, and our flex. And we can just plug these in, and you'll see that each of these does what we want it to do. And then what I'm going to do here, because I hate messy networks, so I'm just going to select all these, and I'm going to hold A. And in Houdini, if you hold A with selected nodes, you can either align them like that, or you can align them up and down, which is nice. You can also Shift L to organize just those nodes, or L to organize everything in your network. That sometimes really messes things up. So I like to just have control and hold Shift A. Okay, so we want to essentially compile this into a way we can control each individual finger. And how we want to do that is we'll take a null, I'll call this input, and then we'll drop a skeleton blend. And best way we can just start this is I like the curl to be my first, honestly, I don't know why. So I'm gonna start with a curled fist. And then one thing, I just do this out of paranoia. You don't have to. I turn off scale because these joints should not be scaling. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and do that. I always do that. You don't really have to. It's not a big deal. And I'm gonna keep it in local space, so I'm not gonna turn on this world space. And you'll see now we can curl the hand in and out, but we want to be able to control each of these fingers individually. So I'm gonna go ahead and on the group, I am just going to select the index finger. And then with the index finger selected, you can see that now this only controls the index finger blend. Even though this whole rig pose is the whole fist, this slider just controls that index finger. So I'm going to call this index finger blend. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just hold Alt and drag that skeleton blend out. And then on this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to select all of the middle finger joints. And I'm going to call this middle finger blend. Okay, and now we can control the middle finger and we can control the index finger. So we're starting to get these kind of set out. And the nice thing about this is since the joints are named the same, we can use these same skeleton blends for all the rest of these. We don't have to remake these and reselect them for each one of these. So we can drag these out, and then I'll go ahead and I'll just do the ring finger, and I'll go ahead and just skip until I've done the whole hand. All right, so now I have the thumb, the pinky, the ring, the middle finger, and the index finger. And one weird thing that I think is really cool about these skeleton blends is that you can actually go past one. You can't go into negatives because there's no difference kind of there. But I can actually go past one, and you'll see it'll keep curling, which I think is very cool and gives you a lot of control. So really, you honestly don't even have to animate this exactly how you want, or set this rig pose up exactly how you want, because you're going to have further controls than just your base skeleton blends. All right, and so we have this all set up now. And I'm going to go ahead and select these inputs, drag them into, hold them and drag them into this null, and put the null into the rig pose. I'm going to call this rig pose out. That way, when we're copy and pasting these, I'm going to go ahead and just select all these, Shift O to make a network. I have mine set to always be black. Yours will probably be like some other color. And I'm going to call this Curl Blends. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to drag everything. So just select all of it and then Alt drag. And I'm going to plug this guy in here. Last output of our curl blends. And then I'm going to call this Splay Blends. And I'm going to take our, where's our splay? I'll call this Splay Out Blends. And then I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to replace this with this guy. And now we can curl. So if I curl the front finger and then I want to splay it, we already have these controls set up and we didn't have to do an individual one for each finger, which saves a lot of time because there's a lot of fingers. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make sure all these are reset to 0. And then I'll go ahead and just do the rest of the hand and then I'll show you what I like to do next. All right, so I have all of these set up. It's just the same thing copied and pasted with the changes in these rig poses. And each of them connects the input to the last skeleton blend in that setup, and then all of that goes into the third input of the bone deform. And we have full control through each of these how we want to blend our move our fingers. But going from each of these, like if say animating this way or adjusting poses this way is extremely annoying, and this is not how I would want to work. So we're going to kind of set it up in a nice way inside of a subnet. Okay, so in order to set this up in a nice way, we're going to select everything, and then we're just going to press Shift-C. And that's going to put everything into a subnet. It'll probably take a second. And now we have this subnet, which comes in through this first input and then out through this output. So we have the input and the output, and now we have a much cleaner little setup. So in order to set these controls up, we're going to highlight the subnet, and then in here you'll see these inputs. And we don't want to make this an HDA because there's some stuff I'll get into later about KineFX where you have to have basically default states. And if you try to put a rig pose inside of an not a rig pose, if you try to, it can get weird, it can get funky. So we're just going to ignore HDAs for right now, and we're just going to work with subnets. I'll show you more about HDAs with KineFX later. So to start and to make this nice, we're going to select it, and then select this little gear icon up here. Go to Edit Parameter Interface, and we're going to get a box that looks like this. And then first off, I don't want any of these. I don't care about these labels or any of that stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to make them all invisible by just, if you want to see that again, selecting all of these and then hitting this invisible tab. And then they will disappear from here and our interface editor. And we can see them again by checking this on or off. And to apply these changes, all we have to do is hit apply or hit accept. They do the same thing. So to start setting this up, let's drag in a folder. And you don't really have to worry about the folder name up here. We'll call this curl. And then I'll hit apply, and I'll have a curl folder. And now if I dive in here, the fastest way to set this up is to go up to our curl blends, and then all we gotta do is drag each of these, and we do want to name them so we know what we're working with. But let's go ahead, and all you have to do is you have to click on little bias icon on this parameter, and then you just have to drag it in here, and it will be linked for you. So let's call this index. Then we'll go down. We'll call this middle. We'll call this one ring, pinky, and thumb. We'll hit apply, and let's hop up. We'll hit accept, and then now you'll see we have all of these controls at the top level, which is really nice to just have them on one node, so we're not hopping around from node to node and controlling things weird. In the future, I would like to create one that basically is like a full, so it's like whole fist, so you can control all of them with one slider. But at the moment, we're just gonna keep doing this and just show you how to set all this up. So go back up here and go back into the edit parameter interface. I want to create another folder, so I'll call this one display in, actually. Display out. It doesn't matter. You can set these up however you want. And then if I hit apply, you'll see that we have the second tab. We can change if we want them to show up as tabs or little simple boxes, but tabs are nice for fingers just because you're going to have a lot of controls typically because you got a lot of fingers. So on display, we'll just go ahead and we'll do the same thing. So we'll go drag these guys. And I'll probably speed this part up. So I'm just going to stop it. All right, so now we have all of our finger controls set up into a HDI. I can display each of them. Either way, everything works on top of each other, so you can control super easy like this. One quick tip about working with tabs and inside of parameters is just like how if you control middle click on each parameter, you can reset these parameters, or if you alt click, you can set keyframes, or if you control shift click, you can delete all of the channels. So if I animated this flex, for example, and I have it going like that, if I didn't want any more animation, I wanted to delete both these keyframes, I can just control shift click and it'll delete everything and just keep the value that it was at when I did that. One thing though that you can do, if say I have a lot of stuff set up and I don't want to go through and I don't want to control click each of these on every finger and reset everything, a really quick way you can reset or add keyframes or delete all keyframes is actually you can do all of the same controls like in clicks and hotkeys you have on these parameters, and you can actually do them on the shelves. So if I control middle click on the curl, it will reset all of these. Or say if I undo that and then I alt click on the curl, it'll set keyframes for all of these. If I undo that, or if I want to delete all of these keyframes I just set, control shift on the tab and I can reset all of these. So a nice way, you can either just work like this and just control middle out all of them. Or another thing I like to do is I'll put all of these inside of one folder, and I'll call this, I think this is the left hand. And so now I can, it will dive down past this and clear everything inside of this folder, even if things are in folders underneath it. And another thing you'll notice also is when everything inside of a folder is set to its default values, you'll see that the text is actually in standard. It's not bolded. You'll see the rest of these are bolded because there's parameters inside of this folder that are not at their default values. So if I control middle click on these, you'll see that they are returning to their default settings, and you'll see that they're no longer bolded. Same goes for values in here. You'll see that as soon as I change this from the 0, it goes from its default value. You'll see that it turns bold, and then if I bring that back down, you'll see it reverts back to normal. Okay, so this is how we'd likely control the hand. Real quick, I might as well just show how I go about making these as a whole. So essentially all we do is hop into our subnet, and then we'll do a skeleton blend. And we'll simply just, instead of doing anything on this group value, we will input the first position and the second position directly into the rig pose out. And then we'll go ahead and we'll just do this for the rest of them. Here. And then we want to reset this as the last input. It really doesn't actually matter where you put it, I don't think. You should be good even if you put this in the middle, because all it does is just add on to itself, kind of. So I'll keep doing this. And one thing also you want to note is that by default, this is actually set up to a default value of 1, which is annoying because it's going to bring in whatever the second input is. So I always bring this back down to 0, and then when you drag this, whenever you drag this into your parameters, whatever value it's at when you drag it in, that's going to be the set default. I'll show you real quick how to change that if you don't want them to be like that. So let's dive back into our little controller here, and I'm going to make a folder underneath this left-hand folder. I'm going to make this one a simple folder, so it's not a tabs folder. And I'll go ahead and I'll bring in the curl full hand, and I'll bring in display out full hands. Display in full hands. And our flex full hand. All right, and so now you'll see these aren't in a tab-like folder like the rest of them. Oh, I left it as folder name. Change that to full hand controls. Because this is set to a simple folder, it won't be it won't be like a tab. So if I change this to a tab folder, it's going to look like this, and it's just going to add on to the rest of our tabs. I can go collapsible, which will be this kind of open shut like tab. Radio buttons. You got a lot of different options here. Simple is kind of a nice little bounding box for stuff. Then if I wanted to change any of the default values of these, like say the default value of this was like 0.228 or something, and every time I reset it, it would go to 0.228. All you gotta do is on the parameter, hop over to this channels tab, and then this will be your default value. So if I change this to say 0.5, and now I reset this, it's gonna go to 0.5 every time I reset it, which is not what I want, but you might for something. So there's that. And I'll hit accept, and now we have the option to kind of work with the hand individually and full, and we can continue using these as well. Like it doesn't, these full controls don't affect our ability to continue using this individual finger controls. So that's a really nice way I like to control my hands. And then let's go ahead and reset that all. And that, I think, sums up how I like to do hands and fingers and how you can make a bunch of rig poses, combine them together into a subnet, and get some really simple, easy controls. All right, thank you for watching, and I'll keep doing these KineFX tutorials, and we'll keep covering more and more kind of advanced topics on this. Thanks. I want to start talking about inverse kinematics. So inverse kinematics are essentially, I'll explain it with a rig pose a little bit. So for a rig pose, you have forward kinematics, which is where it basically goes forward down the hierarchy, and that's what determines where these joints end up. So if I rotate this, it's going to rotate everything around this joint. I can keep going, and it'll essentially basically be kind of just like a robot, kind of like one thing affects the next thing. Whereas inverse kinematics, and I'll show a better example of this soon, but would be if I was to move this joint. So if I was to move this out here, and everything else that needed to move to get this joint here would move accordingly. And obviously the rig pose is FK, so we don't want to, I mean, that's not going to do it, but inverse kinematics is essentially setting a goal and then setting a start point, and you can have like a twist effector and stuff, but I'll show you how we set this up right now. So I'll dive into the full body kinematics node in the next video. This one is just showing how to set up inverse kinematics, which the full body inverse kinematics solver is great, but it doesn't work perfect for everything. Especially I like to do my arms as just their own thing. So I'll show you how we do that right now. All right, so the first thing we're going to need to do inverse kinematics is we hit tab and we go just type IK. We'll find this controller called IK chains, and it's going to require a skeleton and the IK drivers, and I'll show you what those are in a second. So we have this base mesh again with our bone deform. This guy just plugged in to our FBX model, and we're going to create a rig pose, but actually we're not going to want to do that yet. We're going to, you can use a blast node, or there's actually a delete joints node. I feel like delete joints is probably what you should be using, but I don't notice a difference, and I almost feel like blast is faster. I need to do a quick test of that, but I'm not positive. I'm just going to use blast for right now, just show you that you can manipulate skeletons basically just like any other kind of mesh. Is this, do I have going? Oh yeah, no, okay, yeah, I'm an idiot. So I'm gonna just space G to center this, and then in the blast, I am going to go points, and I'm gonna go delete non-selected. And what I want to delete here is I basically want to isolate what's going to be driving this IK. So I want to isolate the shoulder, the forearm, like the elbow, and the hand. Okay, and so I got this now. And now I don't want these to still be parented. So you'll see I have these three joints, and if I throw down a rig pose right now, you'll see that this is still rotating the rest of these guys. Or if I move this, it's going to move everything down the chain still. And I don't want that. I actually want none of them to be parented at all. So I'm going to drop down and add sop. And I'm going to delete geometry, but keep the points. So you'll see we don't have these edges anymore, but we still have these points. And now if I move these around, it nothing's parented. The hierarchy is basically just flat. So each of these can be controlled in their own space. Okay, so now that we have this set up, this section here, I'll color these black because you don't really need to worry about these too much. So essentially just delete the driver points, which for IK you want your basically the source. So like for arms, you'd want like the top of the arm, and then you'd want the middle, so like the elbow, and then you want the hand joint. And then for legs, you get like the top of the leg, the knee joint, and the foot joint. So that's kind of how you drive that. And I'll leave this as red pose because why not? Okay, and so it's because I like to keep things kind of neat in here. I'm gonna put this into a null, and I'm just gonna call this null input. And then I'm going to take the skeleton, which goes into the input, which is just our base skeleton. And then the drivers go into the second input, which is called IK drivers. All right, so we'll plug this in, and then turn off these point displays. And then if we start moving this around, you'll see nothing's really happening. So we haven't really done anything yet. You still have another step you have to do to set this up. So if we hop into the IK chains, you have to hit this plus button, and here's where we're going to set up the inverse kinematics. So we want to hit this little selection icon, and then we want the root. So our root is going to be the upper part of the arm because we don't care about the inverse kinematics after that. And then the middle name is going to be this joint. The tip name is going to be this joint. Okay, and now in this is where we set the goals and the twist effector. So the goal is going to be the end. So the goal is going to be the tip. And then the twist effector, or the twist name, is going to be our middle. So that'll be the elbow. And now one other thing that's really annoying is they don't set this by default, but the blend has to be on 1, or you're not, it's just going to send everything in here. It kind of has like a built-in little skeleton blend, which I think is annoying. But now that we have this set up, everything's set to 1, we can move this, and you'll start to notice that we have these kind of backwards like controls where the elbow, this is the elbow joint, controls where the elbow, like it's basically trying to point that joint towards this point, if that makes any sense. Like the elbow's up vector, I guess, is this joint. And then you have your hand, which kind of controls the whole little setup of it. So yeah. One thing about this is if you get the elbow joint too close, it's going to have a lot of issues. So I actually usually like to back the elbow joint up from the get-go, just because you want it to be behind. And sometimes I'll even reparent the elbow joint to the hand, and I'll show you that in a second. But we have a few more controls we can get in here. If you want, say, when I'm rotating this, you notice the hand doesn't rotate at all, which a lot of time is probably how I would like to edit, because I don't want to have to adjust the hand to match the arm whenever I rotate this thing. But if you did want that, you could go orientate tip, and then if I clear this out, go ahead and move this back, because why not? And then I start rotating this, you'll see that I can actually rotate the hand. But the problem with this that I don't like is that, say I move this guy in and down or something, you'll see I have to continuously rotate this hand to kind of match where I'm positioning the hand joint. So it can just get a little annoying and a little wacky if I'm doing a lot of animation. I'd typically like to just animate the hand positions later, unless I'm doing something where like he's gripping something, or I want the hand rotation to stay the same as the arm moves. So there are uses for this. Don't think that you just should cross it out of your mind. But typically I'll leave this orient tip off. I almost never want to do stretching. Stretching is going to stretch the actual skeleton. So with stretching on, do this kind of elastic look. With it off, it's just going to try its best to get to this position. And if it can't, then it's not going to stretch the skeleton. It's just going to go as far as it can go. All right, so one thing I like to do is after I delete this connection, I like to actually reparent it, but I kind of reparent it in the opposite way. So by the opposite way, I mean, typically in this setup, we would want the elbow to, wherever the elbow is, we have the arm control this, and then the hand be parented to the elbow. So hand parented to elbow, elbow parented to upper arm. And we'd have this kind of hierarchy going. So sometimes for IK, I can get away with only even controlling the hand joint, really. So what we do for this is we'd go in here, and for the joint, we want to select our elbow joint. And then for the parent, we want to parent it actually to the hand joint. So the elbow will be moving based off of our rotations and changes to the hand joint, actually. So move stuff like this. And I'm going to move this back. Let's just say move this back -5, just so it's not right on the joint. All right, and so because of this, now when we rotate this joint, or move this thing down, or kind of move around this this hand, this elbow joint moves with it, and we can actually kind of orientate where the elbow is just based off of how we move this hand around, which is really nice sometimes, not having to jump between like jumping back and forth. And we can still jump back and animate this this elbow joint itself. So I like this workflow sometimes. It's not always ideal because, again, you're always going to be controlling this basically no matter what. But yeah, that's essentially the gist of IK chains. So this setup, and then you want to do so for doing everything, you can run all like your legs and your arms through one IK joint. So if I go to this blast node, all we do is essentially just isolate. I actually don't think we need the tops. I think we really just need the twists and the base, or the tip joints. And then if we go there, we add and delete this reparent and clear out this rig pose. Yeah, we don't need that. We actually probably don't want the an effector, because we're actually just going to be selecting the root based off of the first joint. So basically, so we go, then we hit the plus button on this IK chains, and let's just go ahead and select this guy, and then twist name, select this, guys. So that's our left arm is done, and now we'll hit plus, we'll add a third one. Let's do the left leg. So root. Oh, one second, sometimes KineFX has some bugs. So we'll go root, middle, and tip. Then we'll go left leg. So we'll go twist, goal, and again we're just selecting now these our blasted joints. So go last one, tip, and then we can honestly on these also, if you don't want to do these extra little selecting them, we can just match by name, because this is all the same skeleton. I don't like to do that just because I feel like that's a bad habit to get into, and I mean it's gonna work 100% for this skeleton, but I feel like eventually if I lean, it's gonna give me it's gonna cause a headache in the future on something not working. So I'm I usually just like to just go ahead and just select the joints. But okay, so I have the blends set to 1 on all of these, which is, you just gotta make sure you have that because it won't work otherwise. And then let's just start controlling these. So you'll see, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna push these knees out because again, that's not something we want. So we can now move the leg like an actual leg would. And we can use the twist effector to basically locate where we want the knee to be looking at. And all of these are now controlled on this single rig pose right here. So we don't control anything with the IK change node. We just basically set that up to tell Houdini how to set up the constraints. And that's the gist of this. So yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll continue on with more KineFX stuff in the next. But because all right, so in this class, I'm going to be going over the next step, I think, in IK solving, which is again, in the old system Houdini has set up in like 18 or in before, this would all be in the object level, and it would actually be very complicated to set this stuff up. But because they moved to SOPs level and they have all these great new additions into KineFX, we can actually get full body IK through essentially one node, which is awesome. So we're gonna go and I'm gonna talk about the full body IK node in this class. So if you hit tab or right click in the network and just go in here, I have some digital assets, so don't worry about those. But if I hit full body IK and I bring this in, then you'll see this is a full body IK solver, and it's got 2 inputs. All right, so we're gonna set this up, if you watched the last class, in the same way we set up the IK chains node. If you haven't, then I'm gonna run through the whole setup again. So essentially take, I'm gonna start it out, I'm just gonna call this null input. All right, and then so we have our little animated skeleton in here, and then we're going to use a blast node, or you can use delete joints, or you could use even a delete node, and we're essentially going to isolate what joints we want to basically use as drivers for this full body IK. So for me, one of them that I always use is the hip, and then I like to grab the feet, and then I don't think I'm going to do the hands. I'll do the head. I think that's it for right now. So I'm going to delete these, and then I'm going to go delete non-selected. And typically, if we're doing more complex stuff, I'll throw it in anyways, just because it should be part of your setup. Should run it through an add SOP, and then delete geometry but keep points. And this is just to make sure that everything is unparented. In our case, everything is already unparented. And for the sake of this, I'm just going to show it. So let's say I wanted these knees joints in here too. So you'd see that they're parented to the foot joint still. And we don't want that. We don't want anything. We want everything to move on its own and not have any constraints or not have any parenting for the setup. So we run it through a add sop, and then we make sure that we're deleting geometry but keep points. But for this, I actually don't really want these knee joints, so I'm just gonna bring that in. And then for this setup, we want to plug the first input of the full body IK into the base skeleton, so that we want this to just be whatever we're feeding it. There can be animation on this, there can be everything, anything. You could have rig poses above here, you could do whatever you want, but we basically want this to be the driver that's not affected by any of our rig pose joints over here. Sorry if that doesn't make much sense. I'll elaborate a little bit in a second, but we want to drop down a rig pose now. So again, you'll use this node a ton, and we're going to plug this into the second input of our full body IK, and that's almost it. From this point, let's see, if you bring this in, you'll notice not much is happening, and that's actually one important thing to note, is that this is often used with mapping, and I'll show that in the next little video. But for right now, we don't want this default value to be mapping attribute. We want it to be match by attribute. And now we're going to get this full body IK solver where we can move these joints around, and it's going to try its best to essentially make it work. And that's not, we don't really want that always. So if I move the hips down and back or something, you'll notice the feet are sliding down, and we don't really want that. So one thing we can do in here is on the full body IK node, we can hit this drop down in the configure option, and here is where we'll start configuring the weights of these rig pose joints. So hit plus, and I'll go ahead and I'll select the feet, so these joints, and right away I'm pretty sure that has an effect. No, it doesn't. So right away it doesn't do anything. If we crank this weight up, you'll see that it starts respecting the foot location of these a lot. You'll start respecting essentially this location a lot more than it respects this location. So it's going to try a lot harder to make this work than it will to make the hips place where they are. So I can move this hip around, and it's still gonna have effect, but it's gonna make sure that these feet are weighted essentially 10 times more important than this hip is. So that's kind of how it's reading it. With feet a lot, I like to go ahead and just take the priority up. The higher the priority, the more important it is to lock that location. For feet, I usually keep them the highest priority out of any of the configurations, just so that it locks the feet to the ground. So if I go 2, then you'll see that the feet are pretty cemented to the ground, and we can take this hip and we can do some fun stuff to it. And yeah, so I mean, that's hideous, but yeah, so you can see how this setup kind of works a little bit, and so I can add a bunch more of these. So let's say I wanted to throw in the hip, and I wanted to make the hip important. Then it's really not going to look a ton at this head node. Okay, and so let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and bring in a few more of these. So let's see, I'm going to bring in the hands. Yeah, honestly, that might be it. I'm just going to bring in the hands. And now on this guy, it should automatically be set up. but I'm going to go ahead and set the feet again. Those two, it doesn't matter too much. And then you'll see that these hands have weight. But now if I don't want these hands to drag the hip, I can go ahead and I can select the hip, and I can increase the weight of the hip. So this is really just kind of like a weighting system of how you want things set up. I can go ahead and grab the arm if I want to make that super weighted. And if I increase you'll see if I increase the priority of this arm joint, or this hand joint, above where the foot joint is, it's actually going to respect the foot joint more, the hand joint more now. So you'll see that it flies all the way over here, because it's saying this is most important. First, look at this, make sure this is matching. Then look at this joint, make sure this is where it is. And then look at this joint. And then, well, actually, priority 0 is where all the base priorities are. So then it's essentially saying, look at the rest of the joints. And this hip is 2 times as important. So I'll clear this, and I'll show a little bit more. I'm also going to clear this because that's tedious. So I'll go back and I'll select, I want to select both feet actually. So select the feet, I'll give it a priority of 2 or something. And then you can actually add a center of mass. So this will kind of, this will work. You'll notice it's not crazy, but yeah, you can see what it does. It adds just a center of mass to the body when you move it around. And up here you have the actual, because this is a solver. This is in itself kind of like a little solver inside of Houdini. And it runs through these iterations and tolerances. Now, a lot of the time, actually, I don't think this tolerance is quite enough. So I actually go a little bit lower. Sometimes I'll get some jittery feet is the whole thing. If I leave this at 0.01, sometimes the feet on this rig will get all jittery, and if I have a lot of movement and stuff like that, and they'll kind of start looking a little glitchy. So I'll actually sometimes go down to 0.01 or 0.05. That's fine. Show you kind of what dampening does. So the damper it is, essentially like the smoother it is. I don't think you can go much. I guess you can. But essentially you'd want to keep this 0.5 is fine. I sometimes go like 0.9, or I usually don't go above 1. And then the more iterations you have, like most things, it's going to be more accurate, but it's going to take longer to solve. And then you have this fabric solver, which I'm not exactly sure what's used for. I mean, it sounds like it's used for fabric and like maybe clothing or something. I can't attest to that. I don't know. I have actually not used this yet. I always just stay on the full body AIK solver. But as far as how this works, that is essentially the gist of this solver. All right. So that I think about sums up the full body IK solver. If you have questions about this, let me know in the comments, and I'll try my best to answer things. Or if you need me to make another video at some point in time, I can. So again, thank you for watching. In the next class, I think we're going to cover some of the match move animations that involve using this full body IK node. So again, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Lesson, I actually don't know if I want to use this base Mixamo model I've been using, because I'm actually going to be using animations from Mixamo, and I want to show how you can take any FBX with a skeleton and essentially map it to that Mixamo animation that you want. Even though the skeletons have completely different names and probably different joints and all that stuff, we're gonna use any animation to animate our character. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to go into CG Trader, and I'm going to go ahead and just find some sort of rigged character that's free. Alright, so I went ahead and grabbed a FBX from CG Trader, and let's open it up. So it came with a few, so let's just do the Y up T pose. So alright, awesome. So we got this guy in here now. And then we earlier downloaded an animation from Mixamo for, and I think in the first class we got a little little Roomba dancing animation of that base character. So there's a few ways you can import animations that aren't on your normal mesh. So you can just bring it in through this animation FBX file, or I usually like to just go ahead and drop a animation node. I'll go ahead and do that right now. So if I hit tab and I go FBX animation import, this node essentially replaces this input. So if we bring this in, so if I hop back up and I select that Roomba dancing, you'll notice that we get a terrible result. And then if we isolate this, this is what that animation looks like on the skeleton. So that is not at all what we're seeing here. So essentially we want to match these points to the animation so that this character dances like that Mixamo animation. So to get this animation onto this mesh, we need essentially 3 nodes. So if we hit tab, and then we need to bring in a rig match pose node. We need to bring in a map points node. And then lastly, there's going to be a full body IK solver. I'll move these out of the way. And for right now, we're just going to focus on this guy. So we'll take the first input, which will be our third input on our FBX import. And then we'll take the second input on this rig match pose and plug it into our animated skeleton from Mixamo. If I go ahead and hit Y to just cut that. So the goal of this, we're going to be trying our best to align this skeleton with our skeleton we have. So if we get going on this, we're going to tweak rotate lengths. Essentially, we're going to want to align things. If you want to change around, hop around from viewport to viewport real fast, the quickest way I know is just spacebar and then the number values at the top of your keyboard. So spacebar 1 is just like your perspective view. Spacebar 2 is top, and then if you hit it again, then it's going to be bottom. Spacebar 3 is your front, and then again is your back. Spacebar 4 is your right. Spacebar 4 again is your left. And then I believe you start getting into UV views, and we don't really want that. So let's go spacebar 1, and this is our top view. Actually, let's start with the front. So we want to align these as well as we can. And actually, from the beginning, let's go ahead and in this node we can scale the scene down. Actually, it might be about right actually. So let's just start tweaking these. And in order to tweak, just by grabbing the end of the node, you need to have tweak rotate lengths on. And this isn't going to be the best match right now, but I'm going to go ahead and just show the next few steps. Again, you probably want to spend a little more time matching this up. If you want, you can always try. Shading is procedural, so you can always edit this later if it's not giving you great results. So then you plug these into the map points node, and you essentially want to, it's best if you offset it a little bit just so you can kind of see what you're connecting. And as long as you have the viewport, your handle enabled, which is this thing, to get there you just have to hit enter. If you are on something else, like if you're on select or something like that, just hit escape and then hit enter, and you'll get back to this. And then with this selected, you just click the point you want to connect, and then you select its reference point. So we'll go ahead and we'll do this for the right points. And you don't got to do all of them. You just have to do whichever ones you think will be necessary to get the right animation. And sometimes you'll run into things like this where you're not quite sure, because this guy's got two X. Actually, no, we got two here. Never mind. But sometimes you'll run into situations where, like, say the spine on this guy will have like 5 joints instead of 4, and you're not really sure where to put it. That's kind of up to you. You can play around with stuff, and that's something we'll also play around with in the weights of the IK solver. To delete a point, you should just be able to control middle click twice. So if you just have a selection and then you don't want this anymore, you messed up, say you plugged this guy into the head or something like that, and you definitely don't want that. So just control and then double tap the middle mouse button, and you should be able to get right out of that. All right, and then so we're going to plug these guys into the full body IK solver, and then immediately you're going to get, with the default values, since we're doing a match move and we're using a map points and all that stuff, we actually do want this mapping attribute as the default type, which is the default type, but usually causes issues if you're trying to just run a normal IK, full body IK. But then if we bring that in, then we should have our animation. Some parts of it aren't as good as they could be. So we can go into this full body IK and we can start running some of these configurations. I'm also going to go ahead and throw the tolerance down a little bit just because that usually helps. And I'm going to go ahead and give the hip value a little bit higher of a weight. Maybe I don't want to do that actually. So we're getting this weird bent leg look, and we can tell that we don't want that to be working the way it is. So yeah, so it looks like in here it's going to come down to how we have the rig match pose set, and we can honestly play around with this viewport at the same time if we want to figure it out till we get it right. Let's see, I think the toe is a little bit still a little messed up. Maybe this guy could go a little bit out, or maybe in actually. So again, a lot of this is it's a little tedious sometimes to get the animation right. You can also, if the feet are something that I often have difficulties with, as far as getting like good good stuck feet and like blending between animations and things like that. So you can actually just use like a skeleton blend or something, and only skeleton blend the rest of the body, or maybe just like dial down the effect of the feet if you want. Might be helpful to you. But then you can see we got this guy going. I'm going to delete this hip. I'm actually going to make the legs the most important again, like I used to do. Yeah, so we're getting so it's looking terrible, but you can see where I'm going with this. If we want to increase how well this full body IK solver is working, we can bump up these iterations. Again, it's going to make it slower, but it will make it a little bit more accurate. And we can do something like, maybe let's see what happens if we got a center of mass. So it helps a little bit. So I think that this isn't the best example of a perfect version of this, but you can see kind of how you could use these tools to really transform your FBX rig or rig character with any other animated skeleton that's out there. So thanks for watching, and we'll continue with more KineFX stuff. This 7th class, I'm going to show how you can make collision geometry, and we're also going to go over a little bit of the rig bob. So one thing that annoys me a lot is when I'm animating and I have to get my feet to stick to a floor or like something that's not flat. Animating by hand is extremely annoying and usually looks terrible, so that's not the route we want to go about it. So we're going to show a way how to procedurally make the feet never overlap with the ground. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to make something like a grid. Then I'm just going to merge these two so you can see everything that's going on. And let's give this, I'll go ahead and I'll flat wire shaded so we can see all the subdivisions. I'll go like 100 by 100 or something like that. And let's do something decently large. Something like that. I kind of want to make, maybe I go like a little bit less. Maybe actually bring this in a little bit more. That's whatever. That'll work. All right. So let's create a null and let's just call this our collision surface. And you don't have to necessarily just do this for floors. You could use this for other things as well. So bring this up actually, so we can kind of, and let's rig pose this character. Let's move her over here or something, and let's have her take taking a step. So this is not how you should probably do IK for this, but I'm just gonna quickly and dirtily do this. So her feet are going through the floor, and we don't want that. So we're going to find a solution for that. Bring this over here. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to drop down a rig vob. Where is it? Rig attribute vob right here. And we're going to hop into it. And the way you work the rig vob is you have to have your handle enabled. So if it's not, you just hit escape and then hit enter, and you'll be in the right mode. And you notice you can click on these. Now, the one thing about the rig vob is that it basically computes your output and your first input. And usually when I'm messing around here and doing stuff, I don't want to actually be selecting any of the output stuff because that's just annoying. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to disable the output. So now we just have our input points, and I'm going to just go ahead and drag in our feet. And then we can go in here and we can either type in set point transform, or we can select these and we can go set point transform. I'll go ahead and just do that. And in this, it's going to try and set it if you set it in the viewport, but really all you need to do to make sure this one is setting the right point is you need to connect this point number to this get point transforms number. So this, as long as this input is basically telling the rig vob which output, which point to set all these values for. So I'll just copy this over. It's this guy. Okay, and so now in here we can do lots of stuff. So the transforms inside of these joints in a rig vob work in a transform matrix because the orientation is important for these. So one way we can transform stuff in here is just an offset transform. And this is just showing you some stuff in the rig vob. we don't actually need to do this. So you can see I can move this foot up, and as long as this is going into the set point transform, it's going to transform that point. But if I plug this, for example, into this point transform, it's going to set the other point, which it's going to, you can't really see it actually because of this grid, but it's moving, hold on, it's moving this foot over here. So into this one, it's going to adjust this foot, and then because this joint right here is this guy, if I plug this into the set point transform, it's going to set that joint's position. And since we're using the original position of this foot, and we're using offset transform based on that, it's going to be in the same place as it would be if I was just setting that foot. Okay, so I don't want to do that though. So we're just going to delete that, and we're going to work on how we go about setting this up. So one thing about the rig attribute op is it's really it's very annoying about how it takes inputs, and it'll yell at you a lot if you're not feeding it the right stuff or you're feeding it weird things. It does not like to be fed geometry. So if I plug this in here, it's going to yell at me. It hates it. So what we need to do if we're going to plug in any type of geometry is we don't want to compute it. So we actually have to go over in the top level of the rig attribute op. We're going to go over and we want to turn off compute transforms for input number 2, because we don't want to compute the transforms of this because there are no joints. So if we dive back in, we can drop down now a node called collide geometry, which essentially it amounts to array kind of. And what we want to do is we want to, let me see if I can do this all in one. I don't care enough. So we're going to go into the collide geometry, and we want to set it to the second input. It's going to yell at you once, and then it should be fine. So we have it set to the second input, so we're feeding it this grid, and we want to essentially grab the transform of this, and it's pretty simple how we do this, honestly, and we want to plug it into the transform. And you're going to see immediately that it's shoving the foot up, and we can control the collision distance with this parameter. So we want to find a good value because it doesn't know where the outside of this foot is, like it doesn't know how thick the skin is. So you kind of have to play around with these until you get the right values. You can also use other VOPs and stuff like that later on to do some distortion and things. But if you wanted to orient to the surface, you could do this match orientation, which will essentially snap the orientation of the foot to wherever it's colliding with. I usually actually leave this on. You don't have to though. I actually might not for this one. I'm gonna go back to 0.01, and you'll notice it looks terrible because the rest of the rig is not moving with this guy. For something like this, for something like this other foot, we would want to match the let's see, we'd want to match this, and maybe it's not colliding at the right point, but we can dive into that later. But right now you can see that it's projecting these guys up, and maybe we change the collision distance to be a little bit closer, so 0.5 might be good. All right, and so while that's working, the rest of this rig is not following along with it. So what we want to do is we want to use a full body IK and use these newly projected collide points as our transformers. So you hit tab, I'll go full body IK. Put this guy in here. And it's going to give us some errors initially, probably. Actually, we want to plug this in above the rig bot. We don't want to use that yet. I'm gonna just create a null here to make this easier. And then we want to probably run blast or delete joints stop in here, and go ahead and delete. Nope. We want the controllers essentially. We want the legs to be able to bend, so we don't want these to have their own weights. So we'd like to delete everything but the feet, and then we want to make sure the rest of it isn't that affected. So we can select all of these. We can play around with what joints we want and don't want later, but for now we'll just delete all those and then check on delete non-selected. Drop an add sop and make sure none of these are parented to each other. So just delete geometry but keep points. And this should still work fine because all it's working on is the joints. It doesn't care about any of the parenting or connections. Okay, so then we can go ahead and plug this into the full body IK solver and make sure this is set to match by attribute. And we should get some sort of results right off the bat. But really we want to make sure that these weights for the feet are high and important for this. So if we do that, then we're essentially guaranteeing that these feet follow the surface. And now you can see the feet are snapping to the surface here. And on this guy, we can go, and I would like to also probably add a center of mass. So the knees kind of bend with the points and stuff. Yeah, that's one way to get some cool transforms and things, and you can play around with the other tolerances. I'd probably always set the tolerance down to 0.001. And you can play with collision distance, maybe 1, and then we'll maybe do like blend distance, all that stuff. Basically all this is this is telling it how far away it's going to collide with the geometry. And then this is trying to basically orient the axis to the correct like curve of the surface, kind of. That makes any sense? And you can keep playing around with some of this stuff. It's not always super accurate, and there's some issues sometimes that you'll get, but there we go. Actually, that's better. So basically, I'm just editing the up axis right now and of the normals. But yeah, so that's how you go about getting collisions with feet. And I can go ahead and on this rig vop up here, I can do all my animation stuff, and then whenever I'm ready to make sure that it's matched to the floor, I can plug it in here. There's also other nodes for this in here that involve things like motion clips, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I'll get into that in future classes. There's actually an adapt to terrain KineFX node. I believe it's here. You don't have to do anything inside of a VOP. It should just be, yeah, it should be up here. But you have to, you're gonna have to create motion clips and things to get this to work. All right. Well, I think that about sums up how you can get some fun. Yeah, you can get some fun basically clamp to ground constraints on your rig mesh. Right, that in this course, we're going to be going over the quickest and dirtiest way you can rig up a character. I'll be doing a much more professional and in-depth rig of a character in the next video. I'll be doing that today at some point, so hopefully in the next few hours after this video gets uploaded. Right now, a lot of the time, you'll be working on something and you'll have some small character part or some small thing you need moved, and you don't really care about spending the hours and hours and hours to professionally rig something. So you just want kind of a quick and dirty rig. For this example, I'm going to hit tab and I'm going to drop down a test geometry Tommy. And it's a good idea just to make sure you're rigging on the base skin. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to turn off his clothing. And we're going to drop a skeleton. I don't like that it's skin texture looking at me, so I'm gonna turn that off. I'll just work with the mesh. And the skeleton's node is going to be if you hit enter to make sure you're in the state view. It's going to be our main way of creating joints and bones. We can create bones and joints in other ways in KineFX, like you can use curves. Curves are edges to create your bones, but that's something we'll get into later. And honestly, the skeleton SOP is usually the one you want to be using to create your bones. Okay, so the way it works is we can just start dropping down and clicking in the viewport, and we'll instantly get these joins. Now, if we want to, you'll notice it keeps creating the bones in kind of a chain, one after another. And if you want to stop this chain, so we don't want this next bone we drop to be connected to this endpoint, we'll go ahead and we'll hit Control and middle mouse button click. And now we can start a new chain anywhere else we want. Control middle mouse button click again. Or we can actually start a chain branching off of any of these joints. So if I click on this joint, you'll see this is now branching off of this guy. Okay, so I'm going to delete this just so we can start fresh. And I'll create a skeleton SOP. And to work with this the way we want to, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to merge these two together so we can see the test geometry and work with the skeleton SOP at the same time. So a quick hotkey for doing this is if you have two things selected. So I have my skeleton and my Tommy selected. I'll go ahead and I'll click on the outputs for this, and then I'll just hold Alt and click, and it's going to automatically drop down a merge SOP. And so what we can do from here is we can start looking at some of these skeleton create joint placement modes. So by default, the mode is set to view based, which for quick and dirty rigs, you actually probably want to be using this. Normal based is going to use the normals of the skin to kind of interpolate and try and find the center point where it's going to drop the joint. Freehand is going to put it anywhere in free space, which is typically what you want for something like if I went into the front view and I only wanted I wanted the joints to be created, you'll see exactly on this plane, then freehand is what you want to use for that. Otherwise, if you do it in open space, freehand is going to be weird because it's going to try and guess where you're dropping these points. So I'll just undo all of that. Escape, enter to get back into this viewport. So I'll show you what view-based does. Well, actually, I'll show you surface real quick. It's going to put the joints on the surface of whatever you're clicking on, and it has to be viewable in the viewport. So go ahead and delete this and drop a new skeleton. And I'll show you the view base, which is typically what we want to use for a very quick and dirty rig. So if I highlight the merge, and then I have to have the skeleton selected with the merge still highlighted for this to work. I actually think I'm not even sure if I need the merge. Yeah, I actually don't need the merge here, just as long as whatever geometry you have is highlighted and the skeleton is the one that you selected. Okay, so we're going to jump into view-based real quick, which is going to take wherever you click, and then it's going to try and find the first intersection and then the last intersection with the mesh, and it's going to try and put the joint in between the two. So for an example, I'll just show you real quick. If we drop on the shoulder, the elbow, and the hand, we'll notice we get this bone chain that is in the center of our mesh, or at least Houdini's best guess of where the center is. So it's not always perfect. And for a professional rig, we would probably use other means, and I'll get into that in a little, but this will work fine. Again, I'm not trying to discourage you from using this technique because a lot of the time a professional rig is way overkill for a lot of things that a lot of people do. So it makes no sense to rig like that for everything when all you need is something quick and dirty. So we're going to jump back, hit escape, and enter again to make sure I'm in the correct state. And we're going to start rigging this guy with the spine. So you don't have to name these, but I think it's nice and it definitely helps for when you're mirroring stuff. But I'm going to drop a joint where the hip is. That's where we want our first joint to be. And then I'm going to drop the second joint somewhere around the spine end. And then we probably want to drop down where we want the head joint to be. And then from there, probably a jaw joint. And then control middle mouse button click, and let's make a head joint. All right, we'll fix this up a little bit here in a second. We probably don't really want to do a ton with the jaws and the head and all that stuff, because this is just a quick and dirty rig. So we want some more subdivisions on this this spine. We want to we don't want just one curve, and so instead of making a spine like that and making a bunch of them, we want to jump into the modify view after we've created this spine joint, and then right click, and we want to press split selected links, and that's going to split it in half. And if we want more, then we'll go ahead and, with all of them still selected, we'll hit split selected links again, and now we have 4 of these spine links, and they're all aligned with each other, so it's nice and easy to manipulate. All right, so let's jump back into the create mode. Let's go ahead and do the, let's see, that's his left, and it's the left side of the character. So let's do a upper leg, middle leg, ankle joint, and then the toe. And let's control middle mouse button click, and that looks fine. So now we're going to go from the top of the spine, and we'll go ahead and create a shoulder joint, an elbow joint, and a hand joint. That looks good. And now the fingers can be a little tricky, but we'll go ahead and do those. And I'm going to go ahead and, just because the clipping on this viewport is kind of bothering me, so I'll just dial this in so that it doesn't clip when I get close. That's just a viewport thing. Don't worry about that. But so let's do the thumb, and the thumb is 2 joints like that, and control middle mouse button click. Let's do the index finger. Great. Control middle mouse button click. Do the middle finger. And then we can go into tweak mode if we want, so we can actually edit some of these. just if it's not perfectly lined up. And tweak mode will allow you to, if you select on a bone, if you select like on the actual bone itself and not the joint, you can kind of rotate around the joint axis by where you grabbed, which is nice. All right, so that looks fine. And then I actually don't think I need to hop out of tweak mode, but I'll just for the sake of it. All right, so now, I don't know what I just did there, but keep creating these joints. I'm going to hop out of tweak mode. I think it's doing some weird things. So all right, awesome. So that actually is most of what we need to do right here. And now all we need to do from this point is we want to mirror these arm and leg joints across the z-axis, which is why I mentioned that it's important to have this thing centered, just because this makes it easier. So all we'll do from here is we'll drop down a skeleton mirror. And from the get-go, it's going to mirror it over the z-axis. And it's going to mirror everything. So it's actually going to mirror our whole skeleton. We don't want that. We just want the limbs we want mirrored. So we'll go into the group and we'll make sure we select this icon. And we'll go ahead and we'll just select all of the joints that we want to be mirrored. And then we'll hit enter. And now we should have just the joints we want mirrored across, and everything looks great. All right, so I'll show a quick way of, now that we have everything mirrored across, I don't like how the jawbone is aligned, so we can just drop a rig pose and then align it with, if I hop into the front view, I can align it with the rest of kind of the neck bones and everything, just so we don't get any weird stuff going on. So that's fine with me. Again, since nothing is bound yet, it doesn't matter. I know I mentioned that we don't want to be translating these, but since that only really applies when we're deforming a mesh, when we're building this skeleton, we can transform these all we want because nothing is bound yet and we're not deforming anything. So we're just kind of setting up where we want to capture this skeleton. Well, we're setting up the rest position of this skeleton essentially. All right, so now that we have our skeleton lined up and made how we want, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start binding this to the skin, which is an easy method, but there's a few knowns involved, and for someone who doesn't know how to do it, it can be a little bit confusing, so I'll run through it real quick. So I'm going to drop a note just for organization purposes and call this skeleton rest. Hold Alt to drag this out and create a new one. I'll call this geometry rest. Alright, so now that we have our skeleton rest and our geometry rest, we can start binding this to the skin. So how we want to do that is we'll go ahead and we'll create a, we need a few nodes for this. It's pretty simple, but for someone who doesn't know how to do it, this step can be very annoying because you do need more than just the Bi-Harmonic Capture for this. So the first thing we're going to need is a bone capture lines, which is going to take our, if we display these points, it's going to take our skeleton rest, and you can see we only have these joints, and it's going to turn it into a resampled curve essentially. So we can actually increase or decrease this resolution by lowering or raising this max axis fraction. For me, this has never actually affected much at all for our deformations. I might be missing something on this, but for me, the defaults have always worked perfectly, and I've never ran into any issues. So I always just leave this guy at default, and that's the first node. And then the second node we need to drop is, we have two options for this. So there's a tet embed and a tet conform. So let's start with the tet embed. And the first input of the tet embed is going to take the polygon mesh. So it's going to take our geometry rest position. And the second is going to take our bone capture lines. So we will hook it up like so. And this is going to create a tetrahedralization of our, if I turn display points off, you can see we have this rest geometry, and then we have our tetrahedralization of it. I hate that word. And we'll go ahead and you'll notice right off the bat that it's much bigger, or like expanded from our rest geometry, and that's because enlarge input mesh is on by default on this node, which actually causes some problems typically for me, because you'll see here on our fingers we have this kind of cavity gap here, and when we turn this on, we have these overlapping areas, which is actually going to run into some issues where if I highlight this and template this guy, if later on we're trying to deform just this index finger, we could run into some issues where that actually has effect on this guy, and we don't want that. So typically if we're using a tet embed, I turn off enlarge input mesh, and if you want higher resolution on this thing, and this actually does affect your deformations, you can drop down this min triangle scale size. So if I go something like 0.001, you'll notice as soon as it's done calculating, it's going to take a second, we have more resolution around areas where we need it, like under this arm and things, which is great and what we actually want. The lower we go, the more computation time it's going to take. But the one thing we got to remember about this is that it only has to compute once. This isn't something that's going to ever slow down our deformations down the line. This is just a one-time thing that we're going to be using to capture these weights. So 0.001 is fine for me on this. And so then the other option we have is a tet conform, which works in the same way as the tet embed, but it's going to take what geometry we have here, and it's going to create tetrahedralizations directly out of these polygons, as opposed to kind of remeshing it and creating its own tetrahedralization. This, I usually like the tet conform better than the tet embed, but it really depends on your input mesh. It's not that big of a deal. You won't notice very much at all, but I usually think the tet conform is more accurate and more and faster to compute. The only time I think you wouldn't want to use a tet conform is if you have geometry that's really unevenly divided, like really not clean geometry, where like say everything else here is exactly how we have it now, and then we have like a big polygon right here, like something massive, we would cause some problems. Small differences like how these polygons are smaller than these aren't going to matter at all. And I'll show you what this looks like here. So we'll bring this tet embed over here. I'm going to disable it and hold Y to cut the wires from it so it's not getting in the way of anything. And then we'll plug the first input of our tet conform into the rest geometry and the second input into our bone capture lines, just like we did for the tet embed. And then give it a second to compute. Right now that's computed, you can see we have a I hate this word so much, but we have a tetrahedralization of our mesh geometry. And you can see that looks fine. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use this tet conform for our example. So again, both the tet conform and the tet embed work fine, and I think by default the tet embed is the one Houdini uses, but I sometimes have better luck with the tet conform. So from here we're going to drop down a Bi-Harmonic Capture, and this is the last step we need to capture our weights. And in this first input on the Bi-Harmonic Capture, we're going to plug in our rest geometry, and on the second we're going to need to plug in our capture geometry, which is what we just did with this tet conform. And again, same thing for the TED embed. TED embed, we go into this second input as well. So we'll turn this on, we'll let it compute. All right, so now that it's computed, I'll drop down a null, and I'll call this character rest bound. Okay, and so now we can go ahead and drop a bone deform. We can plug in our geometry to deform is going to be our everything after this bone capture Bi-Harmonic, and then our rest points are going to be this rest skeleton that we have up here. And then because we actually don't have any deform points, we're going to again plug in our skeleton rest, and we'll just drop down a rig pose on this third input here. And you should be able to see now, if I start manipulating stuff. Oh, I didn't want to translate anything. You'll see now we have our mesh in a way that we can deform. And right out of the box, rig pose is a good little a way we can deform things. And I'll show you how we can get a little bit more accurate of a deformation. Turn that off. So for starters, on the bone capture Bi-Harmonic, we can increase this max iterations and lower the tolerance if we really need to. Something like 3 maybe. And this is going to take longer to compute than before, so I'll hit stop. All right, so now that it's computed, one thing we want to do is we want to store this some way, because we don't, if we're bouncing back and forth between a lot of stuff, every once in a while this bone captured Bi-Harmonic will actually recache, and we don't want that. So we can do a few things. The quickest way we can do this is just with a stash node. The one thing I don't like about the stash node is the stash node stores anything you plug into it and stash into it into the HIP file itself. So now this is in my KineFX rigging from start .hip file. And the reason I don't like this is if you start stashing too much stuff to your HIP file, it starts taking a lot longer to actually save your HIP file. So this didn't really impact my file size much at all, but if say I'm working with some huge geometry or something that's like a gigabyte in size, and I stash that, now every time I save my file, it has to save that whole gigabyte file along with it. And eventually you can start running into situations where it might take 30 seconds or so to save your HIP file. And that is incredibly annoying if you're trying to save your work constantly. So I would recommend actually doing a file and going something like, I mean, you can just save this anywhere. I'll get into like HIP and job folders here in a later tutorial, but let's just call this capture character.bgo, and we'll change this to write files and then change this to read files. And now we can delete this stash and delete these guys. And now we have our captured geometry being read back into us. So this should work fine. And we'll drop down a rig pose. And one thing I'll show you now is how we can go about creating like weight painting. So from the start, this is actually probably not the best example because I kind of probably should have added some more joints to the jaw so we could rotate the right way. But yeah, it's ugly. But let's see. Let's find somewhere that has some issues. So if I start just manipulating things and finding out where I might want to weight paint stuff. So let's see. So I'll go ahead and just show you what weight painting is. Yeah, here's a good little spot for it. Okay, so again, we use 3 iterations, which is going to, if we go back to our bone capture Bi-Harmonic, you'll see that what it's doing is it's basically capturing areas around the our skeleton, and it's making them basically able to be manipulated by the joints themselves, or the bones. So not all of these are always the best, and one thing we'll see in this example is when we bend up the arm, we get this kind of interaction with the side of him, which we don't really want necessarily right now. I don't know, you might for whatever you're working on, but bone capture Bi-Harmonic is pretty good, but it's not, there's going to be usually some issues. Again, for quick and dirty, usually everything's fine, but I'll go ahead and show you just how we'd kind of fix this. So we drop a capture layer paint, and what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to edit the painted weights that we have. So when I'm working like this, what I want to do is I want to change the visualize from all capture regions, which will show all of the captured weights in their own colors and stuff like that, which is why we see all these different colors. And we want to change it to selected capture region, and this is only going to show the area that we have. So when we're using this, the way we want to basically work is if we hit our right mouse button, we can we have left mouse operations, and we have middle mouse operations, and we can choose between these. So if you had named your joints or whatever, you can go through these and pick out, like if say we'd named the spine joints and then the arm joints and the leg joints, we'd have all of that information here, but since we're doing a quick and dirty rig, we don't. So an easy way to select what joints we want to work on is just the region selector. So if I have the region selector selected and I just click on the mesh, it's going to show me and move that capture region to whatever we have selected. So I can go ahead and I can go reduce, and this is going to, as long as we have this capture region selected, this is going to reduce any weighting from the area that we have selected. So I'll go ahead and do something like that. And then we likely want to smooth it, so we can either smooth layer or smooth final. Smooth layer is going to just smooth out the weights that we have selected, whereas if I go back and you don't have to switch this to all capture regions to smooth final, but just for a better understanding, it's going to smooth, if we have smooth final selected, it's going to smooth everything here. So it's going to blend it in with the top spine joint, the shoulder joint, basically everything. And the higher we increase this opacity, the more the smooth, the more effect the smooth is going to have. It is one thing I find annoying actually, is that the opacity drives the smoothness of this stuff, but it's usually way too much when we're actually painting, so you're gonna probably be hopping back and forth between these. But let's just smooth this out. Maybe smooth, and I'm just using the mouse wheel to scale up and down this guy. Alright, and so now when we move this, you'll see we're getting this effect. Now if we want to get even a little bit better overlaps and stuff, the next thing we can do is we can drop a let's see, it's called a delta mush. So this is going to work on overlaps nicely. So for example, this little overlap right here where we have the elbow bending and we have these things kind of pushing into each other, the delta mush will help out with that crease right there. So we want to plug in the deformed geometry. So we'll plug in the output from our bone deform. And then we want to plug in our reference geometry. So that would be whatever is going into this first input here. So I'll go ahead and I'll move the character rest bound null out here so we can just kind of keep everything plugged into the same thing. You'll notice immediately when I plug that in, a few things happen. So because it's taking the rest geometry, it's basically trying to find out where it should and shouldn't be colliding with itself. And we can make this more accurate by amping up the iterations. Eventually you're going to run into some issues. The step size is how far it's going to push any geometry. And so you can start to see how this can give you better looks and better deformations. So yeah, if I go ahead and I clear out this, and these values aren't what I'd necessarily be using. I mean, usually something like 0.5 and like 50 is fine. After that, you might want to just work on some weight painting or something like that. So let's dive into how we can set this rig up real quick and dirty to animate with. So the first way would obviously be how I showed you guys a while ago on the second KineFX class. There's a kind of blending layers little tutorial on how you make the tool like that, and that tool works for much more than just fingers. So like if I wanted to bend the spine, for example, let's do a rig pose real quick, and let's again with FK you can control multiple things with one controller. So if I select all of the spine joints and I rotate, each of these spine joints is rotating, and since it's forward kinematics, say this one rotates 3, or I'm rotating all of them by 3. So this one would rotate 3, and then this one would add 3 to that rotation. So now we've rotated 6 degrees, and now we've rotated 9 degrees, and now we've rotated 12 degrees. So you can see how this can create this fun, nice little smooth mix between these things. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and I'll rotate. I'll go ahead and I'll just do it in the viewport. So if I select these guys and I turn right, and then I hold Alt to copy this out, and then on this one, call this turn right. Then on this one, I'll turn left. And then turn left. And we're going to use the skeleton blend now to blend between these. So input 1, input 2. And we can blend between these. And one fun thing you'll notice is that you can actually blend above values of 1 and below values of 0. And the below values of 0 actually I think is an update in the newer versions of Houdini. So if you have 18.5, update to I think 406 or whatever it was where I first noticed that they'd updated it, because I think in the early 18.5s you can't go below 0. But you can go above 1 in all of them. So yeah, so update Houdini to a newer version, and that should work fine for you now. And I think that's real nice, just because it allows you to kind of manipulate things a bit better. So yeah, that's one quick way you can start animating in here. And then another quick way would just be to quickly set up a IK chains. So let's go IK chains, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a null for this little third input. I'll call this deformed skeleton, and plug this guy in, this guy in. And what we want to do here is we want to just drop down a blast, and we want to change it to points, and we only want to select the points we want to control. So we want these drivers to, we're going to do the limbs here. So I just want the elbow, the hands, the feet, and the knees. So, and then I'll go delete non-selected. So we have these, and then I will drop an add. So the goal of this is, right now they're still parented to each other. When we turn on the delete geometry but keep points, then they're just points and there's no parenting. So we don't want these drivers to be parented to each other. So then we'll drop a rig pose, and this is going to be our controllers. So if I hit the IK chains and I go root name, upper elbow, root name. Oh, no, don't want to be that guy. Yeah, sorry, I'm having some issues. Min name is going to be the twist effector. Tip name is going to be the hand, and then we can just match by name. Blend 1. If we want to orient to tip, we can check that on, and that's going to make it so that the hand rotates around the however our rotation is. So we'll keep adding these real quick. Root, mid, tip, match by name, turn it to blend to 1. Root, mid, tip, match by name, blend to 1. Root, mid, tip, match by name, blend to 1. So now we can all of a sudden very quickly just start moving around in IK. So this is an IK solver, and this is going, our elbow joint is going to control kind of our twist of the arm or the leg, and then our foot joint is going to control the goal location. And if we orient to tip, I'll just go ahead and I'll do this for all of these so you can see what's happening. So orient to tip is going to take this, if I clear this out, it's going to take this end, and as before, we would just be able to move it around. Now, when we rotate this end tip, it's going to rotate the orientation of that joint. So, one thing I like about this is just the control it gives you over the kind of orientation of it. One thing I don't like is how when you move this arm around now, you have to manually move the orientation of that joint with it. So I actually usually leave this off and then just orientate the hands separately if I want, unless I want, if the only reason I would not do this is if I wanted the hand to stay somewhere. So if, for example, on this hand, I think that's, yeah, it's that guy. If on this hand, it's up here and I want it to stay like this, like it's grabbing something, and I move this hand, then it's gonna stay in that same position. So, all right, so there's that. Now, if I wanted to transform stuff, so if I wanted to move him around, you can either just drop a rig pose and manipulate his hip. So the hip joint is going to be what we're moving around in world space, or whatever joint you have that's if you notice on the skeleton, everything stems from, we started with the hip and we built everything off of it, and that way the hip is at the top of the hierarchy and is the parent of everything inside of this skeleton mesh. So and that's the way most rigs are built. So if you import something, usually the hip is, or the pelvis, or whatever you want to call it, is going to be the rotator. or master kind of transform. Sorry. So call this master, and then we can drop a full body IK, which is the same kind of concept as the IK. And I'll go ahead and put these in boxes just so it's a little bit more organized. I'll delete that mask because I don't really care about it right now. So we're going to do the same kind of technique here, where we blast some nodes and then drop a add, just to make sure nothing is parented. And sometimes we want things to be parented, so you don't always need that step, but most of the time we want our drivers to just be just straight up controls. So on this blast, we'll go ahead and we'll select whatever points we want. So I think I'd go something like, maybe I'll keep the hip in, the legs, and let's go the arms too. So now we have a full body IK, and what we want to do is we want to change it from mapping attribute, which is what we'd be using if we were like matching points to like motion capture or something like that, and we wanted that to affect these skeletons. I run over how that works, I think, in the 5th course of KineFX 101 that I was doing. So just change this to match by attribute, and it's going to match by the name attribute, which is what the joints are named after. And now should be able to deselect that. Just use this rig transform. Did I not? Oh yeah, I need to delete non-selected. That's my bad on this blast node, because before it was doing everything. It was giving me all of the joints except the ones that I wanted actually. So delete non-selected, and then we'll bring this in and we'll use this rig pose to now control this full body IK, which is very nice. But there's obviously some issues we can have with it. So one thing we can do is we can either pin to root, which is going to pin any unparented joints, which is nice. So we can do things basically out of the box, start manipulating a lot of this mesh. And then we can go into the full body IK and start adding and subtracting some of these weights. So if when you're doing these configurations and you're adding these joints, keep in mind that adding any sort of weight to something that we don't have as a driver isn't really going to do anything. So we don't have a right knee driver. So if I put that in and then start changing any of these settings, it's not going to do anything because it's not a driver, so there's no weight that it can even kind of configure. So we need to only be using these. If I clear this out, these are joints that we have as drivers. So I'll do one for the hip, and let's see. I actually think the hip is the root at the moment. So I'll actually do a better example. I don't really want to show the hip. So let's make the right arm, and I'll put him in a position where his right arm is out there. And let's say if we increase this weight, we'll see that he it starts pulling him more towards that that position. It starts basically giving that arm more influence, that hand more influence over the rest of the body. And if we lower this, you'll see even though the joint is out here, it's not affecting him nearly as much, which is something we might want to do for, like, say, the head joint. So and you can even almost animate these if you want. I like to turn the tolerance down to 0.001 just to get any little animation bugs or anything like that, because sometimes you can have a little bit of a glitchiness if you leave it higher. It's not usually that big of a problem, but I just figured I'd mention that. All right, I think that does it for this quick and dirty rig. In the next video, I'm going to be showing you how to get solid geometry to attach to this rig. So for example, if I wanted our character to be holding something, like holding a gun or like a purse or anything really, if you wanted the rig to be able to control something, it's a little bit different than it is at the object level, so we'll go over that in the next lesson. Thank you for watching, and I will have more advanced stuff soon on my Patreon or something. And I wanted it to move in his hand whenever I move it. So unfortunately, KineFX works a little bit different than the object level rigging, whereas at object level, this would be as simple as just taking your object and parenting it to this hand joint. At KineFX, there's a few extra steps, but it's still pretty easy, so don't worry. I'll show you. So we're going to start by dropping a file, and I'm going to bring in this gun object that I have. And just so I can see everything together, so we'll just take our rest geometry, plug it in, and now we have our rest geometry and our gun. And we want to line this gun up with the hand and make sure it's the right size. So I'm going to drop down a match size. I'm going to go scale to fit, uniform scale, and then just so I don't have to adjust all three of these a bunch, I'm going to copy parameter, and then I'm going to paste relative reference. And that way, these parameters over here will match this reference no matter what. So I think the gun is probably like maybe 0.275, something like that. And with the state selected, I can move this position alignment. And then I want to drop a transform node so I can rotate this thing. And I don't want it to be rotating around this axis down here, because this is a very annoying way to work. So to get this axis up to the object, I'm going to go move centroid to origin, and then I'm just going to control middle click on this translate button. So now we have this rotate at this bounding box center of our gun. So we can move it around, and gun's going to look in that direction. So we just want to line this up to how he would be holding it. We can adjust the hands and stuff around this, and we can even make a collision object later. I have some little stuff going over collisions in this, I think the 7th or 6th course of KineFX 101. It's whatever the mesh collision course is, if you want to check that out. You can apply that. The example I use is for feet, but you can use that same example for collisions with the mesh. Okay, so now we have this set up, and I can go ahead and use the deformed mesh again, since I know that this is aligned with the beginning, or the rest geometry. So when I move this, the gun obviously doesn't move with it because we haven't set anything up yet. And there's no way I think there's some method about copying it to points, but that one is a lot more complicated, I think, than the capture pack geometry method. So I'll show you that right now. If we just type in packed, you'll come up with a capture pack geometry. And essentially what this is going to be doing is this is going to be similar to how we set up our Bi-Harmonic Capture for the rig, but it's just going to work on packed geometry, and it's very simple. So on the first input, we're going to take our gun object, and then on the second input, we're going to take the rest skeleton of our mesh. We don't want to plug in the skeleton that's been deformed down here. We want to make sure that we have the skeleton rest. So on this capture pack geometry, what we want to do is we want to first we want to drop down a pack. So you can do this on the node itself, but when you try to manually select, it's going to bump you up to the next level. So it's best, for me at least, to just go ahead and pack this gun before anything. So we would want to hit this manual capture and then select this button, And we're going to select our pack geometry, so it should only be one. I think there's a bug right now where this isn't working right. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a star, which is going to say any geometry should be the capture geo. And then the joint, we want to go ahead and select this hand joint right here. And then after that, we'll drop down a bone deform in the same way we deform the mesh. And we'll plug in geometry to deform the skeleton and our output from our animated mesh. Now, we'll plug all of these into a merge so we can see all of them together. When I rotate this, you can see that the gun moves with the hand, which is nice. I mean, you can do this for pretty much anything. So yeah, so that's how you go about capturing geometry that's not part of the mesh. All right, well, I think this covers up most of what I was trying to cover in this dirty little rigging tutorial. I will go over how you could professionally rig something and rig up. We're going to go real in depth. I already have started building this T-Rex rig from scratch again in KineFX, and that's going to be on my Patreon as a Patreon supporter only. I'm going to be real cheap with it because I just love giving out these tutorials and helping you guys. But I think I'm going to do something like $5 or something if you want this whole course. But it's gonna be a big one, and we're gonna go over a lot of really cool stuff that I had to learn myself, and a lot of cool tips and unique tricks we can use with chops and procedurally rigging a character, and one that's also not a biped. So I've seen so many of these biped character rig tutorials. I would love to go over something that's more of like a beast or like a T-Rex, for example. So yeah. So I think this sums it up. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll get back to you with more complex.
So the KineFX framework marks the first step on a journey to reimagining the rigging and animation workflow in Houdini. In this first iteration, we've got some really powerful tools for motion retargeting, and this was one of the original mandates of the toolset. As development continued, this expanded in scope and is now part of an ongoing project to encapsulate the whole of the character animation workflow. For the retargeting side, I'm not going to be touching too much on that explicitly, so Mithna and Bogdan will be coming back with talks later on that will deal expressly with these tools. For this presentation, I just wanted to have a little play, discuss some of the fundamental concepts, and give an idea of where you can take these tools in helping with your workflows. So on we go to the fundamental ideas behind the toolset. And the big one, of course, is that we're moving everything into the geometry context. And really, this is just a small part of the character rigging process that's being moved into SOP. So blend shapes were always geometry. Anything that was driven by a curve or was adhering to a surface, all these kinds of constraints, they were also driven by geometry. And of course, the final deformation is geometry. So it was really only the bones or joints and the controls that the animator works with that lived outside of this space. So KineFX brings all of that into this same context. The next little note that I have here about the design of the tools is that the world space is king. And this is a really important idea. The points in KineFX and the tools that operate on them, they very much view the input world transforms as being the ground truth. We don't want to change our input unless we explicitly say so. So any local space transformations are computed per operation, which gives us a huge amount of flexibility in doing things that would have been prohibitively difficult working at object level or with any kind of static scene graph. As a little example of this, I'll just jump over to Houdini, and here I've got a very simple retargeting setup that we'll be making use of later. For now, I just want to focus on the skeleton we have over here. It's being brought in by the FBX animation import node. As I scrub backwards and forwards, we can see the motion. Now, all we have on these points is a P attribute and a 3x3 matrix transform attribute. The decision to break the world space transform up into these two attributes is mainly driven by the fact that every point in Houdini has a position. The moment you create a point, it has a position. This is not an optional attribute. So to avoid any potential conflicts, putting things out of sync with a full matrix 4 transform attribute, we decided to keep these things separate and leave P to handle our world space translation, and everything else will be handled by the 3x3 matrix, so rotation, scale, and shear. And as we scrub through, we're seeing the animation. We've got no local transform attribute on these points. The moment that we want to do something in local space, however, well, then we need it. But the nodes themselves recompute this on the fly. As a very trivial example of this, I'm just going to come and put some adjustments on the head. I'll just move it up and rotate it. And now as I scrub through, you can see that the rig pose has applied this as an edit on top of the incoming animation. To prove my point, I'm going to put a delete joint sop down, and I'm going to grab a whole bunch of points. I'll just grab all of these and delete them. If I come back to the rig pose and I bypass and unbypass this, you can see that the head is staying where it's put. So as the topology changes here, the rig pose updates the input local transform before it applies its own edits. So it's a very, very powerful idea, and one that gives you a huge amount of flexibility in the kind of operations that you can perform. So this is key. If I do this the other way round, we can see another important idea. I'll just clear my edits here, and I'm going to translate this off. So having operated on a subset of the points, we haven't lost anything. I haven't deleted anything that's persistent. We still have our original hierarchy. And should I want to then take those edits and reapply them to that full hierarchy, well, I'm only a node away from copying those transforms back over. You can see that this has collapsed down, and that's because, of course, by default, the skeleton blend works in local space. The local space of the abdomen here has very much changed. So if I toggle on the world space, you can see that we're copying over the world space transforms for any joints that exist on the right-hand side. So now as I perform any edits, we can see that flow through and get reapplied to our full hierarchy. So very trivial example, but hopefully demonstrates some of the features behind this idea. So I'll just clean that up and let's jump back to our slide. The next important concept is the idea of a rig as an operation and a separation of concerns that comes with this. This isn't a new idea. It's a very common practice to rig using what we might call a shadow rig or a deformation rig that's a completely separate hierarchy to the control rig that an animator would interact with. And this helps pipelines keep a very clean rig for export. So especially important if you're working with game engines or anything like that, where we don't want the control hierarchy mixed in with the deformation hierarchy. It generally makes a mess of things. So it's very often a good practice anyway. And this is something that's very close to the heart of the networks that you'll see set up in KineFX going forward. We have this minimal set of joints responsible for the final deformation. How we drive those, well, we decide that over here. But we always just write back to this minimal set. So this enables us to stay organized and to keep a clean character for import and export. The next little note is just about the open architecture. The data model for the joints, the points, is very, very lightweight. The minimum attributes that are required are a 3x3 transform for the world space, and a name. And the name attribute, whilst not explicitly necessary for lots of the operation, it's highly recommended that you do name points when working with the KineFX tools, and that the name should be unique per point. So the rig doctor node is one that can help you do this. There's an option to pick up the duplicate names and add a numerical suffix to them to ensure that we have unique names on the output. Of course, this open architecture, the fact that we now have access to the world space transforms at the very lowest level, is hugely powerful, but also puts a bit more of an onus on us to stay organized. So the KineFX tools that are shipped with 18.5 provide some ways of helping with this. There's something to be aware of, that when you go off-piste and start playing with these attributes directly, that you do have to stay organized and keep things clean.
So now we can blend between.
So, what do we have here? Revisiting a prototype. So a long time ago, I had a little play at just a little idea, really, of being able to draw out a bone chain, and this was working at object level, using a stroke SOP as an input. And I did get something working. But there was a lot of Python involved, and we were also treading the slightly sketchy territory of creating objects dynamically and actually modifying our scene based upon a continuous input event, and this is already something that it can end up being brittle. So this was the little prototype that I tried to knock up at object level, and I thought it made a good use case to explore in KineFX. So let's see if we can recreate it in KineFX a little bit more easily. So I'm going to create a new geometry network, and I'm going to dive inside.
So I'm going to select the twist and
drop a stroke SOP to enable us to draw. And I'm just going to resample this into the number of joints that I want. So I'll pick the default 10 for now. The next thing that we're going to need is our transform attribute, as I just mentioned. So we'll initialize this using, again, another stock SOP node, which will create this 3x3 transform for us. Drop down the rig doctor, which we're simply going to ask it to initialize our missing names. There's one more option here which I haven't changed from the default, which I need to, on the orient along curve, which is, instead of using an average of the edge directions for the tangent, I'll choose next edge. And now as we come back, we can see that we've got joints that are nicely aligned to their child. Okay, great, that's our joint chain made. Step number 2, can we retrofit a spline to drive this with a spline IK? Well, let's have a go. I'm going to fit a NURBS curve to it. Currently I'm creating quite a lot of points to conform to this shape. So let's
selected, we'll go to our
pull that tolerance right up.
FK control
And in fact,
prefix.
I think we might be... Yep, so this will force the creation of 4 control points. Now, because of the input shape that I've given it, it's having to do some pretty wild stuff.
Both of these
So let's start with a slightly
will
simpler
be
code.
parented to the master.
Okay, there we go. Something a bit more sane as an input. We've got our 4 points. I'm going to transfer the
In the same
transform
spot
information from the original chain.
as the control that they're driving, we can just parent them right in.
And I'm going to duplicate this rig doctor just to do the same thing and initialize some names. And of course, I should be going back and making these names a bit more sensible. So maybe something like spline
Box,
joint as the prefix. And here I can have spline control as the prefix for these. Next job is just a little bit of
use these.
stuff to make it a bit easier to identify these points. And then, of course, we want to be able to move these controls, so I'll put down the rig post. So the final step is to actually evaluate the
Space switching.
IK.
So just as
So
we
I'll
did
plug in our original created
with the head,
joint chain up here, and I'll add our controls on the second input.
what kind of naming
The VOP node that we're looking for
camel case?
is the
One word.
curve solver here.
We can say
And I just want to grab all of the points from the first input and all of the points from the second input
click and drag.
and drive one with the other.
So follow
To do this, I'll use the get point transforms VOP, which fetches a whole bunch
chest.
of transforms based upon a group.
Alt click and drag.
So this is going to be our
Alt click and drag, and we'll do
joints that we want to drive. I'll alt click drag to duplicate that, change this to the second input, and this will grab our
This is
controls.
useful for times when you're
The last step is to
maybe it's
actually write the solution
and so you want the
back
hand
to our
to move
points.
and the leg moves.
Okay, and you can see a little jump here if I right click and untoggle display inputs.
So all of these
And now as I bypass and unbypass this, we can see the effect that our
to the position of the goal.
solve is having. And we are getting that loss of fidelity that we would expect when we're trying to fit a
Connection.
curve
And now the world, or rather
to this arbitrary
follows
joint chain.
we want that to be a child of the master.
There's one thing I forgot to do, which is to make sure that our curve type matches the type of curve that we're creating on the right-hand side.
Follows cog.
And this, you won't see a difference here for now. However, if I want to get this to adhere more closely to the curve,
Head is going to be our
so let's come back and we'll clear this out.
head bone.
And if I come back to one of my funky earlier shapes,
Later. And now we want to control
we
this
can have a
space
look at
switching,
our controls. You can see that because of the tolerance I've set, we've now got more
do that on the
control objects,
auto object.
and it's given us 6.
Our bone control.
So this might be a bit much to work with when we're actually solving the
Constraints tab. We're doing a parent
IK
one.
solution.
It's a simple.
So we can always create some parenting relationships that work for us better on these controls. As it is, we already have some, and if I display the links, we can see more clearly
Accept that selection.
that because these points still exist
Select the new
on a
parent
primitive,
objects. So we'll select these
we've got that hierarchical information there.
chest, head,
In order to remove that, I'm going to use a humble
click
add sup,
selection, and that dumps us
delete the
down
geometry but keep the points, and we now have a bunch of points floating in world space that I can move individually.
and you can see that we have, again, like we had with the head and the
Now
eyes,
with this higher
we have
count of controls, these ones aren't feeling especially helpful
and head.
here.
Like we did before, we
So
would
if I
control
drop a
these
reparent
blend parameters
joints afterwards,
with part of our UI.
I can just grab
haven't
these ones
built anything for our arm
and reparent them to
in a
the
minute.
controls at the very end.
Very similar
of
to
the chain.
control of the head space that we had before and of the eye space.
And this now gives us
Before we do that, we'll go and
slightly coarser control over this, so we've still got these
our twist control.
main controls up here.
So, no,
and all the rest of it.
call this
Now, of course, we've broken a little bit of, we've possibly introduced a brittleness here, in as much if our
follows
point count changes up here, these names won't exist. So, you know, we've always got to look at
and twist
how we've
wrist.
organized things.
So
But this is just that bit. If I wanted to stick to our
need to be
4 controls, I can just increase the tolerance,
control,
and we'll get those 4 controls
then break
on
these
our
functions.
input.
And then again, the world.
Okay, so that's that. That was the recreating that prototype that I really struggled with at object level.
We'll go to the chest IK.
Back over here. Now, as I built that, I had a thought that
We'll go to our
I've definitely got 2 steps here.
parent
So,
element, simple full transform
being able to identify
select
processes
auto.
and split them up and reuse them for different things, this is something that really gets brought to the fore when we're working with these top level tools.
Accept that selection.
So if I look at the network I just created, I had one step which was to build a joint chain.
Again,
Then I had another step which was to fit a spline and create the controls, and then the final step was to actually run the solve.
grab all these guys, turn off their selection,
So
turn off their visibility.
the thought that I had was, well, if this is just a joint chain, then maybe we
And now we're ready to set up
can pull that from somewhere else.
UI for our arm, and then start
So let's have a
all of this stuff.
hop back over
I
to
should point
Houdini,
out with our
and I'm going to jump in here.
the constraints that we've
Let's
added
exit
to our left
the
arm
state.
bone go
And what I've done here is I've grabbed the animation from
are currently
this network
to
here,
our world. So if I
which was our little retargeting network, which we saw at the
see
beginning.
that they're parented to the master, which
And
is effectively the world.
I've just object merged that skeleton in. Now, this isn't the most efficient way of doing things, but for prototyping, it's absolutely fine. So I've just grabbed that animation.
Is the
I'm
world
going to clear any posing that I've done just to keep things clean.
I have
And you can see that in the green box that we saw in the slide,
all of the ones that we've added.
I've just grouped some
added.
joints on the input skeleton.
So right now, these
I've deleted the
two
other ones,
are identical.
and I had to do an
We'll
extra
drive
step
these
here just to make sure that we had a single
drive
primitive
this
to
for
work
whatever
with,
reason and it's off.
rather than the 5 that we had
These
on the
two are
input.
off and this one's off,
But
this
that's
one's
it.
on.
We've now got
Still
our
getting an influence from this
our
first
input for
blend,
the
which is,
spline fitting.
the world space. So
So here we've got exactly the same network,
may seem
and here's the
redundant, and
spline
in
IK.
a way it
If I
is,
jump
but
here,
I like to
hit
have it
enter
there
to enter the state,
and just set it to
and
0
start pulling these around,
and
we
just
can see
never touch it.
that we've got
What it
that
allows me to do is
affecting the skeleton.
to come in here and I can delete these or
Now,
I can add different ones. I can
taking a little pause just to clock something here, which is that I said I'm pulling in an animation, so I've got an animated input to this, to which we're attaching this spline rig.
If I do remove any of these or change
And then anything I do to it
I can always just turn
is
this back on.
layered
So
on
that's
top
why,
of
I've left it in there.
the input.
I'm going to put that to 0 because I'm
So this is a very, very powerful concept. We've basically got a
space.
and
I'll do the same
a rig setting itself up live from an animated skeleton. We're modifying it and then writing that
parent space,
change
which is,
back.
In this case, the world, and then we
So
also have a world.
This is a very, very key idea, and we'll be seeing a lot more from that as we go forward. The next little bit that I wanted to do, of course, was you can see that as I pull these things around, we're throwing the hands about. Now, this might be fine, depending on the input animation. For me, I thought, well, let's have an option to just
I've gone ahead and done that,
pin
so
those.
you don't have to
So
see it.
I've isolated the input
So, like our master
hand and elbow
neck
positions. I've also done it for the feet.
for the left arm, I've created a
I've removed all the parenting information as we saw before. And then we've got an extra little step here, which is to attach some controls just to differentiate them in the viewport from the other points that surround it. So if I come back in here, we can see that we've just got these green points.
naming convention,
If I come back up here and I'll just add a control.
and that can
On the
be
right hand side, I'm
capital L
fetching some
arm underscore.
geometry from other
Do that. See, I've done that.
object
with all of
nodes.
These parameters
So I've got a simple null
here,
control here.
and this will come in handy.
I'm just going to hide all of this stuff.
Not only
And
when
I've got
we're
a
mirroring
custom
our
control
left
that I made
arm and our left leg,
using a
which is the
simple
right-hand
circle
side,
and
but it'll be much easier
and a
for us to
transform.
find these, that'd be much more visible
So
like this.
back into here.
Houdini generally uses all underscore.
I'm going to select the joints that I want to attach the controls to, and for the ends,
but
I'll
you and I
pick
are not Houdini.
the custom control,
manipulate them.
which is here.
So it's best to have something that's clear and visible.
And for the
And something
twist
you can use
controls,
in
I'll
scripts
just use that
to
simple
search
null.
for L underscore and find
And there we go.
parameter names.
That's that. So now as I come
We've
back
done
into
that.
the
I've created
rig pose, I can actually hide the joints, and I can now use these bits of
later on.
geometry
And
to
then a
select
left arm folder. Left
in the
is
viewport.
spelled out here because we're going to have a left hand folder as well later on inside.
Okay,
this
so
left
there's our IK working.
I've created
I've still got that silly pose on the spine, which is why we're seeing some wonkiness.
parameter which has a menu.
So let's come back and see what we've got as we play backwards and forwards. We've got the input animation
Space
with those controls attached.
IK blend. And then
Okay, so we've successfully identified a couple of processes and put them together in a network. I will just touch on this very, very briefly, which is that VOPs, of which we have many new ones in the KineFX tools to perform constraint operations and IK solves, VOPs really start to shine here over writing FX code in wrangles. Many of you will still prefer to do so, but when code gets more complicated, it becomes much harder to identify what processes we can encapsulate nicely. It becomes a bit more of a mental effort, especially when we might be prototyping and working a bit more fast and loose. And building things in VOPs is really nice because we can see the input wires to our various functions, and we can see where those wires converge onto a single input value. So we can identify more like this which parts of our network we can wrap up into a single verb, if you like, a single action. So that's just a little note here, so do check out the VOPs that we have to use in KineFX that have all been designed to work with these, with transform matrices for rigging purposes. Okay, so reuse and repurpose, I mean, we've already seen that. We've taken our little prototype and we've applied it to the Eric rig. And the next thing is just to keep iterating on these setups. Once we've got a little process, we can continue to stay within it and keep refining the results that little process is giving us. So we've seen a little start of Eric's test rig. We've got our spline IK for the spine. We've got simple IK for the arms and legs. And the next thing was a head lookat derived from the input. So this is very straightforward to do. We can look at the input animation for the head, offset its translation along the direction of the gaze, and use that to drive a lookat after we've run the spline IK. We'll have a look at this in a second. The next little bit is the hand controls. So hands are often something that are a dead giveaway in motion capture retarget. It's becoming much more common for motion capture suits to have support for fingers, but many old motion capture files don't have animation for the fingers. So being able to add a little bit of more natural motion to the hands is something that can really bring a retargeted animation to life. I've already touched on the adding of control geometry. So this is all stuff that we can do as part of the process of iterating on things. So let's take a look back at this test rig. So I've taken all of what we see here, and I've wrapped it up into a subnetwork. If you don't know about doing this, then we can do this just by selecting a bunch of nodes and hitting this box up here. And that will wrap all of that up into a single node. So keep an eye out for your individual behaviors and how you might be able to collect them and keep your networks organized and clean. So very, very powerful stuff. The next step beyond this collapsing is to actually create a digital asset from them. And there are there's plenty of documentation on this, and we'll see it in all areas of Houdini. So this is definitely not something specific to KineFX. It's been in Houdini for a long time, and it is really essential to a lot of workflows in Houdini. So I've gone and done exactly that. If I crack open this network, it's not as clean. I did this before I had organized things properly. But here we've got our fitting of the spline. We've got the spline IK solve. I've then got that head look at. So if I have a look in this network, if I bypass this, this is the add joint VOP is just allowing us to debug where this transform is. And we've set this with a parameter that I've promoted. It just allows us to set the sort of gaze distance, if you like. And this is offset from, whoops, the original animation, so the head on the second input. I've then offset along the negative y-axis by that amount that we saw to the point here. And I'm using that to drive a look at constraint from the current position of the head. So this is where the head ends up after we've pushed the spine around with the spline IK. So we're looking at that, and we're just making sure we're looking at the same position as we were in the original animation, and then writing that back out. So a quick blast over this, and do forgive me for the brevity. I'll be covering this in more detail elsewhere, but this is just a little example. We've then got our setup here for isolating the IK controls. And here I'm actually deleting the joints on a static copy, a time-shifted copy. I'm deleting the joints, and then I'm copying the transforms back. And then I'm parenting everything as I did before. And what we're seeing here with the compute rig pose is the core of the rig pose node itself. So if I dive inside here, we can see that we just have a single compute rig pose node. Again, beyond the scope of what we're looking at here, and I will cover this elsewhere, but this gives us a very quick way of promoting parameters to an HDA when we want to be able to pose from a digital asset. So we can see this up here. If I just match the current definition, and I'll change the display flag here. Here I am with the locked asset selected, and the rig pose state has been built to enable it to be used on custom digital assets. So we can see the rig pose or the compute rig pose nodes contained within and display their geometry in the viewport. Okay, so that's that bit. And if I come here and I'll just clear all of this, once again, it's worth emphasizing that we can bring in this animation and have access to this rig. The rig has attached itself, and what we're seeing here is the result of the rig on top of any input animation. Now, what we were actually here to look at, of course, was the hand rig, and the hand rig introduces another interesting little idea that's worth sharing. That because the skeleton is just geometry, and we can use geometry nodes to operate on it, we've got a couple of other possibilities. So here you can see I've got a little hand rig here. I'm going to make sure that we can see the output. And we've got a couple of broad hand posing controls. So we've got a curl control here, and we've got a bit of splay, which of course we can make these negative as well to bring closer together. And same thing on the other side. The way that I've set this up is actually I'm not using rotation parameters at all.
So our arm is done.
what I'm taking is a collection of
And
poses that
we
I've
discussed
made before, just from the rest position.
we want to
And
make
I've
sure
posed all of these
applied
here.
or accepted.
So there's the left-hand curl,
Changes that we've made
it's the,
to
whoops,
our HDA.
it's the splay,
Just saving a HIP file is not enough.
and the same thing for
We need to send
the
all of this
the right hand over there.
information that exists in our HIP file.
This is, again, slightly beyond the scope of what we've got time to cover, but I'm just wrapping these up into a single primitive and then merging them all together to make a library of poses.
Start cleaning up our network.
This little hand rig takes that collection of poses and then feeds these into a blend shape sub.
Sort of cross-hairy type.
So this is a geometry node. This is used for blend shapes as we would normally think of them. But for some versions now, it's had support for properly interpolating the rotation of normals, quaternions, and transforms.
You might notice that
So we get a really nice result out of this if we just feed in these
even though they're
separate poses,
the arm
and we can use this node to blend between them.
parented,
I'm then having to do a couple of
you might find that distracting.
little extra bits just to
Perfectly fine
conform things,
take
but
one of these
nothing too onerous.
and say that this one's
And here we have it. You know, this is our
we can put it
this
over
is
there
our
if we want.
broad control, and I've also promoted
The distraction.
the state,
Find it distracting. So I'm just going to
so we can also manually adjust
nicely here.
each of the
There we go.
finger joints
In the
after
next
we've
tutorial,
performed
We'll
these
be building
controls,
hand, and
these
as soon as
broad
we've done
controls
that,
rather.
we'll create our
So again, I can come and grab
twist
these
point
guys
for our arm and use one
and
of the
quickly
hand
create
controls
a pointing
to drive that
motion,
twist.
pointing pose rather. Okay, so that's the little hand rig.
The rig for our hand
So this is cool. So
pretty simple. And
we've now got these two rigs, and of course they're layered on top of one another. You can see that the hand's pointing here, and if I move this around,
hierarchy to represent the finger. We'll have our proxy geometry, and those
that pointing pose is
by a series
still
of
getting
controls.
applied afterwards. But you know, I've still got to hop backwards and forwards in the network. So this is another example of a little prototype idea. If I just want to be applying hand animation after a retarget,
Parameters and a little
then I only need this one. If on the other hand I want to be doing a bit more, then maybe it would be nice to have the hand available to us in this rig.
We'll also drive the twist.
So I'm quickly going to run through how we might be able to do that.
So we'll implement that.
I'll open up the type properties for our asset.
Rotate the wrist
I just need to change how many inputs
in Z.
the node accepts.
See that I get this nice twist.
And I also need to add the parameters that drive this stuff. So I'm just going to take this whole
The
network,
rest of the controls are
I'm going to hit Control-C, jump back up
based on a number of
into our rig,
So we can do things
and I'm just going to apply
curl
these
all
changes,
at once.
whoops,
We can splay them,
after
sort of move them,
the rest of the rig has run.
fan them,
And then the output will be this. We can see the warning here on the
and then we can also flex them.
blend shape node, and it's just telling us that, firstly it's telling us we've got bad parameter references. So this is because I haven't added the
Ring and pinky,
parameters back here.
index finger,
The other problem that we'll have is that we haven't actually got our
splay,
little library of poses. So the first thing is to just
and then we have parameters for the individual
butcher the controls from
down there.
the hand rig.
Also for the
I'm just going to drag those over here.
it doesn't have
And Houdini will actually create references back to those parameters, so I just need to make sure I clear all of those.
straightforward.
And I'll hit apply, and we should see
And let's get
that we get another warning here
going to
telling us that we haven't got enough inputs, basically.
proxy and spine
So I'm going to find my second input that I've just created. So I'm zoomed out a long way.
head controls
Bring this, plug that in.
and our arm proxy.
We're getting a little warning.
Control.
Not enough sources specified. Well, no, you're quite right. I haven't connected our library of poses.
We'll turn on our soldier body so we can draw these bones.
Okay, and we have one more step to do, which is just to rename this parameter. So I'm going to say hand transformations, and I'm going to promote these parameters. Just going to close this here. We'll come back up
But
clear any
probably the
edits.
easiest way
And we'll see that we've got a new bunch of parameters here. Now, of course, we can organize these better and make things look nicer afterwards.
call that
But there we go. There's our hand transformations parameter. I'm going to save the node type, match the current definition.
and then
And you can see in our state, we now have access to
so it will pop down to the
all of
origin,
this,
and because these two are the
including
same spot,
our
we can just wire them together.
broad
So now it's
controls.
as if we've drawn this bone at the origin. For starters, we can make its length.
And everything's hooked up. So that's an example of keeping on iterating, exploring these atomic processes, and then still being able to merge them all together, extend assets that you've already created.
Now it pops itself at the.
I'm now going to just delete out
We can then take the length
that asset, and there we go.
bone. So select left arm bone.
Once more, if I, having saved this, I can now drop this into another network. Look, my Hive test rig here.
Down in our
And I'll plug that into the animation. Oh, I haven't got my hand poses. This might be a design flaw. It's certainly something that we can rectify later on. I'm just going to copy and paste this in for now.
negative direction, so we can paste that left arm bone 2 length value
Okay.
and just negate it.
And this is now attaching itself to the input. You can see that I've already got the hand
Root is sitting
curled up here.
at the tip of that bone. And then
Bring that
just
back
as
to
we did
normal.
with
And Houdini being Houdini,
the arm
if I change the input animation,
rotation of this bone, which we
let's
should
see what
call
we've got.
left-hand
I did have a
we want its rotation to be
another one
in the
available to us.
X
Can't remember which one I was using that was
axis, pointing down. And we want it to be
a good
positive.
example of this.
So right now it's oriented.
Let's
in
just
the
try the
same
first
way
one, and we'll see
as
what we
the
get.
lower arm bone.
Okay, so we've changed the input animation.
So we can change that. By
Okay, there we go.
selecting root and moving that.
And this rig is once again still attached, and this does make a nice example because as the animation goes forward, we can see that there's a contact point
We're getting a
just
positive
down,
value here.
just down here,
So that's what we want.
which is completely wrong for this character.
This
So we can use
geometry.
our rig to adjust this, and I probably want to start where the hands aren't colliding,
You can't
add a
see through
keyframe,
the geometry.
scrub onwards,
And use the flag.
and just start positioning the hand
And that
where
will
it makes a
turn
more
that
sort of natural
into a
pose
object,
for
and you can
the
see
character that we're dealing with
So again,
at this point in
with the root
time.
selected, just
See,
position
there isn't
this
time for me to do a proper polished job of this,
on
but
it,
we can see
and select
the
bone,
principle
go back to
is
the
there
length tab,
of being able to use this little custom rig to refine our retarget
turn
and
selectability
get the
of
results
root off.
just how we want them.
So there's our bone. We can give it a color.
Okay, so I believe that covers everything that we have here.
There we go.
As I've already alluded to,
Left-hand bone.
this is just the beginning. We're definitely not
and just separate.
dusting our overalls off and calling it a day
Now it's
for
as if we drew this bone.
the world of character work. We're very aware that there's long ways to go in providing the kind of
And now we can add
interaction
control to this hand bone.
that you would be looking for doing full character animations in Houdini. So we will be earnestly improving the tool set as we go forward. And in the meantime, we really look forward to seeing what you guys
Or our
do with it and look forward to hearing from you.